Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this organizational meeting to order at 4 p.m. Council, any additions or deletions to the agenda? Administration? Seeing none, I'll accept the motion. Councillor Haas.
Make a motion to adopt the organizational meeting of council for October 20th, 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Council, all those in favor? It's passed unanimously, and I'll entertain a motion to go in camera to look at the citizens appointment application review. Councillor Race.
Move to go in camera.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? That's passed. That is passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. We'll reconvene this meeting. The first and only action item is the 2020 stuff.
It's just taking a second.
Okay. I'd like to reconvene this meeting out of camera at 4:02. Our first and only action item is the 2020-2021 organizational meetings of Council. C.A. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. If council permits, I'd like to address public members appointed to boards and committees, which is the third bullet under the action item, prior to moving to the other items. If it's permitted by council to address each bullet individually before moving on to the next one, to focus the conversation and ensure we close each item off with direction from council. So the first item is council public members appointed to boards and committees. Ms. Way has ballots for voting, and she will distribute them to council members in attendance. On the ballots provided, public membership appointment is provided for the SEAC committee, the Hinton Grant Funding Committee, Hinton Municipal Library Board, and Hinton Youth Advisory Council. Administration, I'm just going to get on this way a moment. If there are no questions from council, voting may commence, after which Ms. Way will collect the ballots and she will tally them. We may move on to the other bulleted items for discussion while that's undertaken, and then circle back at the end. So I suppose this is the first bullet and the third bullet.
Councillor Nelson.
As the terms of reference are in front of us and the number of participants required for each committee, how many are we supposed to be yaying or naying for each of the different committees?
Ms. Way.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. So this year we did have a few shortcomings. So all individuals in front of you would fit on the current boards and committees. However, if for whatever reason someone is seen to be unsuitable for that position, you are welcome to vote nay for that individual, and we can find an alternative candidate.
Okay, so if a majority of councillors vote nay, then that person would be rejected even though there's still spots?
Correct.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Administration. And
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. If it's all right, I'll allow for council to finish the voting and then we'll move on to the next one.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving back into the action items and the bullets beneath item 1, council meeting schedule. Moving into that item, included in this portion of the report is an additional schedule for council's consideration. And this is intended really to open up the discussion on how the schedule is working currently, as well as that additional option included for discussion as well. Council follows a schedule that includes 2 regular and 2 standing committee meetings per month, aside from summer months, December, and months with conflicting external meetings. Throughout the year, there is sometimes a need for additional meetings like the FCSS board meeting, emergency advisory committee meetings, strategic planning sessions, as well as training opportunities. There have been instances over the past year where council meetings have been canceled due to a lack of items, or agenda items have been completed in less than an hour. As well, there have also been meetings that have run for 4 hours or more, with a motion to extend the meeting by council when the agenda has been large or additional discussion has been required. Regardless of whether council proceeds with option 1 or 2 for council schedules, administration is seeking balance to be sought to utilize the time well. Option 1 included in the report maintains the frequency in the scheduling that council has consistently followed for the duration of their term to date. Change to the remuneration policy earlier this year allows for council to be remunerated for 2 consecutive meetings within a 4-hour period. Additional meetings such as the FCSS, EAC, or any training have been managed by slotting them in after regular standing committee meetings to address both. Option 2 reduces the schedule by 1 regular council meeting per month. The intention of this change is to allow for the maximum use of planned council meetings, with the knowledge that meetings may consistently run longer than we're accustomed to. An additional intention is the use of the 4th Tuesday of the month to be booked for the FCM or FCSS meetings, the EAC meetings, and anything else. It is upon reflection by administration. The intention is that largely those meetings would be used. There may also be times within the year where an additional standing or regular meeting could be planned, or as a special meeting to use that 4th Tuesday of the month. With that, no changes to the remuneration are included in this, no changes to the budget for 2021, as we don't really know what the impact would be at this time. At this time, on this item, council meeting schedule, administration is happy to receive any questions and allow for council to discuss the direction we want to go.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Councillor Haas?
Yeah, I appreciate this. One, I've always wondered about the 4 meetings a month, and plus we have been seeing more opportunities for trainings and workshops to include council and administration and things to get up to speed on some of the matters and everything. So I think option 2, it gives also a little more flexibility in different styles or other meetings that we might need. It also gives administration a little bit more time, maybe to potentially work on some of the more matters and things like that, plus potentially maybe giving a week a little bit of a break as well. So I'd like to try personally, option 2 to see how it works. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Nelson?
I'd like to move that council approve the 2020-2021 council meeting schedule, option 1. If I could speak to it, every year we've talked about reducing our meeting schedule and kind of all committed to doing things a little bit better and trying to plan better and be more concise, and we really haven't had a ton of success with that. We can easily eliminate meetings by canceling them during agenda prep session, or take that time that was allotted for standing or regular and make that into a workshop night. At that time, we can also determine whether we're canceling a standing or a regular. I have concerns about always eliminating the one regular, which is our one opportunity to make decisions. We've still been pushing 4 hours at regular council meetings pretty regularly and extending quite a few regular council meetings. So eliminating a regular council meeting is, I struggle to see how that's going to be realistic for our group. The other part, if we're pushing towards transparency, as our mayor's been speaking about a lot lately, special meetings are less transparent than the regularly scheduled ones. And they don't require the same amount of accountability, agenda prep, agenda planning. We don't require agendas the 4 days prior as we would for a regular council meeting or standing council meeting. So I would look to the agenda prep committee to cancel meetings that administration hasn't had time to prepare, or there's not enough agenda items to make it worth it. But just eliminating at this point is not something that I would support, and I'd like to stick with what we're doing for our last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. CAO, would it be that easy at a agenda planning session for admin to say, we don't have enough on the docket, so we're going to cancel this regular council meeting? Is it that easy?
Through to Councillor Race. Canceling the meetings is not something that administration does, but through the agenda prep committee, if there are a lack of items, it's a discussion that can be held at that time.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Eustachian.
Mr. Mayor, I'll be speaking in favor of this motion. I think having 4 weeks in between regular meetings of council is just too much. There's press matters that often come up that require attention in shorter time periods than that. I'd much rather see scheduled regular meetings of council that get canceled rather than having special meetings called to deal with emergent matters. So as I said, I'm speaking in favor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Eustachian. Councillor Wall.
Yeah, I'll also be speaking in favor. I think we've shown some success canceling meetings when there's deadline agendas or nothing on the agenda. And I think for our last year, I'd rather keep the schedule and the system the same as it has been throughout our mandate. And then I think the new council can look at changing the format when they come in next year if they'd like. But I don't mind the 3 weeks. I don't have any strong reservations. I just, I've been pretty comfortable with the way that we've canceled when we've needed to, when it's been a light agenda. And I'm comfortable with keeping that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watt. Council, any further discussion? I'll be speaking against this. I really like option 2, and I think there's no better time to try it than our 4th year. Really, this is finding a balance on the side of the organization that we don't see every day, which is the administrative side. And like Tuesday night, we get together, we have a meeting. Wednesday morning, there's a debrief about that meeting. Thursday, they're preparing for the next meeting, which is four days, or really 2 business days away of work. They don't work on weekends. This accumulates, and I know it's hard to quantify the effect, the residual effect that it has on the everyday operations of a director, of a manager, but this 40 meetings a year, to cut it down by 7 is to 33. I think we can still get the work done, and we get to experience and see if this works. If it doesn't work, the next council can revert back to 4, but we've never experienced this. All I know is I hear administration, that turnaround, the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are tight. And for that reason, I think this is an opportunity to work with administration and see if they can create that flow that better serves them to deliver ultimately better reports and things of that nature. So to me, I'm basing it not on our schedule and what we have the ability to do, but to give some clear direction to administration, knowing that this is the structure that they can prepare for the next 52 weeks. So for that reason, I prefer option 2 this year. And I will say, we have been doing this for a long time. It's not the end of the world, but I think chopping off 7 meetings is worth the trial run for 1 year. So that's why I'll be speaking against that motion on the floor. Councillor Haas.
Yeah, I'm also going to speak against it. I think we've been seeing over and over again much better reports coming to council, with administration working on it, but I mean, having a little more time to work on them, and streamline some of those decisions and everything. And I think it is an opportunity to try something different, and give the opportunity to see how it works. And I think Mayor Michaels brings up a very good point. That turnaround plus the lessening of 7 meetings gives a little more that flexibility for administration. Plus, I mean, there is that fourth Tuesday potentially that I know that there is that potential. We have some decisions to be made. Maybe that is when a special meeting is called instead of to make some of those decisions in between if necessary. But I really think that this is a good opportunity to try something different and see how it works out. So I'll be again speaking not in favor of option 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor Wong.
Speaking to your point, Mr. Mayor, with regards to workflow and preparing for agendas, I guess I'll pose a question to CAO Olson. Does canceling a meeting that's scheduled, does that not achieve the same thing as not having it scheduled at all?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Through to Councillor Watt, it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't in that we work a month out, planning what's coming ahead to council to fill up those meetings. And typically, if a meeting doesn't go ahead, it's not that we planned a month out not to go ahead with any items for that meeting. It's something that's happened that affects the completion of those reports in the week or so prior, where we're moving things out. So it's usually unplanned or unanticipated effects that cause us to move. We also, so that's the planning process that comes to senior leadership team to discuss. We have that meeting tomorrow, for example. We work 2 weeks out completing the reports and ensuring that everyone's had a chance to take a look at them before they're put into the agenda the week prior. The time frame gets tricky when something comes before standing committee and then is turned around for the regular committee or regular meeting of council the following week. We manage when that happens, but that is an impact.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watt. Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will not be speaking in favor of this. I feel that administration is coming to us with a suggestion or an option that would assist them. It's a try. If it doesn't work, by a motion, we can revert back to how we used to do it. So I want to give admin every opportunity to bring the best work they can to us. And if you're feeling rushed, we got to work together on this. So I will not support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. Councillor Stashik.
So appreciating the information that's been provided by Mayor Michaels and administration, I still do have concerns though about having only one regular meeting per month. That all of the meetings that constitute the change between option 1 and option 2 are all regular meetings. So I think I'm concerned that council and administration are both going to be potentially overwhelmed with the volume of decisions and information that come forward if regular is only occurring once per month. And I understand that there is the option to take that 4th Tuesday of the month and potentially add it as a regular meeting of council, but that still leaves an interval of 3 weeks between the scheduled regular and then the special regular meeting of council. And if that's the case, I'm not sure that a week extra is going to give the time that's required to make any measurable difference. I'm still speaking in favor of this because I would prefer to see regular meetings that are more streamlined, less information that has to be digested and able to be moved through quicker and more easily. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. I have myself in the queue, and I had that same concern, and I voiced it quickly to CA Olson a while ago, sort of that flexibility. And hearing what Councillor Stashik said, and I hate doing things on the fly, but perhaps a concept where 1 month it's 2 regular, 1 standing, 1 regular, 2 standing, might solve that issue, because if we look at it, at our organization from a quarterly perspective, it's 3 regulars, but if we had on average 4.5 per quarter and we flipped and we lost some, that could solve that issue, because I did have that same concern that we might have some standing committees that are lighter, but then we'll be adding regulars just for the sake of the moments where there's 3 weeks apart. So I don't have a quick suggestion on top of my mind that would flow quickly and nicely, but I do share that same concern. Council, we still have a motion on the floor. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I think I just want to read it. I look at our first opportunity to support this would be today to have an organizational meeting and go home. But we're having a special meeting following the organizational meeting because we've got too many things on our plate in order to handle our regular items at regular council. So if there's something that can be done on a planning standpoint, or even feedback from administration when we're making directions and motions to allow 4 weeks rather than 1 week, or 3 weeks instead of 1 week, so that we can have an item that we can cancel and that administration has enough time to prepare, I think we're all on board with that. I think council's been extremely flexible with adjusting and amending motions for a timeline that's realistic for administration. As long as we continue to do that, I think we're fine to carry on the way that we are. And I still have huge concerns, and I trust that it is not going to happen except for in emergent situations. But in the past, we've also called special meetings and had very little time as council to process an agenda because it doesn't follow the same rules as a regular meeting of council. When the public needs to be provided the agenda and we have to be provided the agenda 4 days ahead, it requires 24 hours notice, which for me as a councillor to make decisions, it's almost impossible to go and seek public feedback in 24 hours. So I see a lot more opportunities for downsides if we start reducing, and the upsides we're looking for, I think we can find through just better agenda management and ensuring we're respecting what administration needs for timelines with motions. So I think we can do both things without changing the meeting schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate or questions? Councillor Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm thinking for administration to come to us with this option, you must have looked or, kind of ran through a lot of the issues that council is bringing up right now. So, can you say how we can work through some of this stuff that we're hearing right now?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Just some clarification. I'm not sure.
They were worried about the meetings being 3 weeks apart, and there's a lot of worry on council's side. Is this going to be effective? I'm thinking, let's give it a try. If it does not work, we can stop it. We can make a motion and go back to how we used to do it. But I'd like to at least give it a try to see if it helps admin on doing your work. And by doing better work on your side, you're providing us better work. So I guess my question was, what you're hearing council say, you must have thought a lot about that in coming up with option 2.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, to Councillor Reese. So the intention was as well to bring some changes forward to council to discuss, right? And whether moving ahead with option 2 is something that council's comfortable doing, whether putting other measures in place are comfortable too. Administration's open to receiving that information and listening to council in their discussion. When senior leadership discussed option 2 and including this as an option for consideration, we really looked at the time spent discussing the items at standing committee meeting, the number of reports that come forward to both regular and standing, and there are more that come to regular than standing, allowing for council to have 2 opportunities to discuss items and then to have a very focused regular agenda to work through what's needed. And with full knowledge that the regular agenda, it might, there might be need to extend. There might be a need to use the 4 hours before extending. So administration discussed that and that there's potential for those meetings to be very full and there to be a number of items coming forward. We also discussed what the impact might be to public hearings and things like that, and approval of bylaws, and that stretch between regular committee or regular meetings of council was considered. These aren't items that come up frequently. It takes a bit more planning and discussion on the administrative side to make sure that we're managing the things that are coming forward effectively to allow, I guess, as minimal of an impact in those areas as possible. So it was something that administration did discuss, and looking at really fine-tuning their planning process for meetings. And there's some changes that I mentioned that are kind of underway in how we do that and when we're talking about what's coming forward and the strategy around our use of council meetings.
I've not changed my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. In hearing all of council, I will still vote against this option. I prefer option 2 in quantifying both sides, the changes that we're going to have to go through. There are some issues, but I'm still weighing them against the day-to-day, week-to-week organizational administrative side where they're impacted by this. And I think a trial run of 1 year to I don't know how to say this. When it comes to vision, I'm a strong proponent that council chooses to do what it wants to do. Administrative recommendations come from other avenues. This one isn't a vision. This is more of an administrative workflow. So the recommendation weighs heavily with me today because this is not where do we want to see our community. This is understanding administration's needs and demands or wants. And to me, I think that's a fair ask to do for a year. So for that reason, albeit there's challenges on both sides, I do prefer option 2. And with that, council, again, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate or questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question that council approve the 2020-2021 council meeting schedule option 1. All those in favor? Opposed? Defeated.
Was that 4 to 2?
3-3.
Okay. Could you say 4?
Ostashik, Waugh, Nelson.
And I have a question for administration. If the calendar is not accepted today, seeing that we don't have a 7th councillor here today, what would happen?
Thank you. We defer to Ms. Wade on this. If she has that. Apologies, Mayor and Council, that may be something that we need to take a minute to look into.
Yeah, Councillor Waugh.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to ask if, since option 1's been defeated and option 2 is the really only other thing on the agenda, what flexibility do we have to amend option 2, say to address the scheduling concerns that have been addressed, that have been identified with the number of regular meetings in a month?
I'll just defer to Ms. Wade.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. So in previous years, the minutes reflect that that's exactly what occurred. Some of the schedule was amended, and then the schedule was put through as amended as per the motion.
Because for me, I'd like us to leave here with some sort of consensus on a meeting schedule. I don't want us taking up too much time on internal matters like this. So I don't know. I know Councillor Stashik and Councillor Michaels have both expressed some reservations about only one regular meeting a month. Is there an opportunity to every second month have two regular and instead of one? And how does that fit in with the administrative workflow of this?
Through to Councillor Waugh, the schedule put forward, this is an option, and it was, again, to spur on some discussion as well. If council's more comfortable with an amended version of this calendar, that's within your prerogative to discuss and approve. As far as administrative workflows, I mean, any reduction is amenable to administration, and or not, we'll work within what council's comfortable with. So an amended option 2 to include 2 regular and I guess my only point of clarification would be to move the second standing to a regular or to add a regular into, so 4 meetings. Be my only point of clarification on that.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Council. Councilor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So CAO, you're saying that a motion can be made for option 2 with an amendment to option 2. So I would like to, motion, sorry, that I move that council approve the 2020-2021 council meeting schedule option 2. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Council, we have a motion on the floor. As of right now, it's simply option number 2 as spoken to in the document. Council, any questions or debate? Councilor Ostashik.
I have a question and then that might lead to a proposed amendment. The question would be to administration, I guess, and in terms of discussing the meeting scheduling. I'm just wondering if there was a reason that it was the 2nd and 3rd were chosen as the standing dates rather than the 2nd and 4th. The reason I ask that is if there was a need for a regular meeting to be added, there would only be a 2-week gap between any regular meetings if it was that 3rd week that was open each time. So if administration could respond to that, then I may have a follow-up.
CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. So consideration was given to where the meetings fall, and the gap, I guess, or the break in the meeting schedule, the 4th week, allows for items that came forward to council through the 2 standing committee meetings to be prepared, regular meeting reports to be prepared during that week to bring forward. So it would be no different than it is right now. It's with the break, with no break, I guess, moving right from a standing to a regular meeting the following week. We like I said, we manage now, so it would be similar to right now.
Thank you, CEO Olson.
I'm good for now. Michaels, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ostashik. Okay, Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate? And seeing none, I'll call to question that council approve the 2020-2021 council meeting schedule option 2. Council, all those in favor? Opposed? No, it's carried.
Sorry, you're the only one that's supposed, I can't see people, sorry.
For your privilege.
Yes.
To administration council, I typically wear 2 hearing aids. My left hearing aid broke almost right in half. I'm now wearing my right hearing aid in my left ear. I'm just struggling to hear. So just for today, if when you speak, if you could speak up and look this way, I would really appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Councilor Nelson.
I'd like to make a motion to direct administration to bring back the council procedural bylaw to reflect specific guidelines around special meetings of council to address the reduction in regular meetings of council. I'll be pretty amenable to this, but the concept is, I think it's already been acknowledged in this meeting, and we're likely to have more special meetings because of the reduction of regular meetings. And I'm concerned for our council and for future councils that the time for advertising and the time for agenda to be presented to council and the public will result in either a real or a perceived lack of transparency. And if we could bring something back within our council's procedural bylaw that maybe speaks to extenuating circumstances for special meetings versus special meetings that we've known for 3 weeks that we're going to host. I just would love some certainty that when we know we're going to be planning special meetings, that they're called as early as possible, and council gets their, and the public gets the agendas with the same types of timelines and transparency as our regular meetings of council currently are provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. I did have one question for administration, because I do like this concept and I think it needs to be addressed. But with the current council procedural bylaw committee ongoing, although postponed due to no legislative assistance, how will that play out together? Ms. Eels?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Ms. Way and I were just discussing this start date for this new calendar, and this might be something that could be clarified by council through motion to allow for that review of the procedural bylaw to take place prior to commencing with the new schedule. The schedule is set to commence in November, which works with administration schedule, but that is something that council could amend option 2 to begin January 1st and allow some time for that procedural bylaw piece to be worked out.
Thank you, Seals. Councillor Hawes?
I kind of like that idea too, because I mean, with budget coming as well and discussions, changing the meeting at this point may not be always the best thing to do because of budget. So, waiting until that January 1st one to maintain the schedule we have now, going through budget 2 is, then having that opportunity to look at not only this part of the procedure bylaw, but the whole procedural bylaw, hopefully, by that time with the legislative assistance starting as of November 1st. Obviously, maybe ground running, I don't know if it's a great way to start, but anyway, but that might, I would see that as an option, definitely an agreeable option to iron out some of these details before the schedule is began. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes.
I just have a point of order. We already approved the calendar, so if people have an interest in discussing when it commences, we'd have to first make a motion to rescind and then bring back that motion to the table again. Otherwise, I think we just kind of move on from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Stashik?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Although I understand some of the concerns that are behind the proposed motion, I'm not going to be speaking in favor of the motion. Unfortunately, I think at this point, council and administration have got other more high priority items that they need to focus on rather than bringing back reports regarding guidelines about changing the procedural bylaw. I think the procedural bylaw committee can take that into account in due time. Although I do share some of the concerns, most especially the one around special meetings to slot a regular meeting in its place if required. To me, special meetings should be reserved for emergent issues that need to be looked at in a timely way and not just held as a placeholder to slot in a regular meeting of council if it's required. That's why I spoke earlier to the option of just continuing to have the 2 regular meetings of council per month and canceling one of them if it's not required. It's there if you need it. If you don't, get rid of it. So I do have some pretty strong concerns about using the term special meeting just to slot in a regular meeting if it's required. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Nelson.
And this might not be a question that can be answered tonight. I know I've had this discussion with, for sure, the mayor, but for example, a night like tonight, could we have called a regular meeting of council to follow the organizational meeting? Our procedural bylaw, I don't have the wording in front of me, but states that we can change, move, do basically whatever, but it isn't clear whether we can add or remove, but we remove them all the time. So could we, in most cases, schedule a regular council meeting a week or 2 weeks beforehand and have it follow the same guidelines as far as notification, agendas, all of that stuff? And using really tonight as the perfect example, could we have called tonight's meeting after the organizational meeting as a regular meeting of council? Because it wasn't emergent, it was planned ahead of time, the agenda was done ahead of time, and that would ultimately reduce many of my concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. As Ms. Olson is looking through that, to my knowledge, we can only change the dates of meetings that we can eliminate, but we can't create a new regular or standing, to my knowledge. But Ms. Olson is looking at that now. But adding that, and maybe there's a direction, because the way it's worded right now, I wouldn't support this, but I would support directing the Council Procedural Bylaw Committee to bring forward something that addresses the addition of standing and regular meetings to agendas. Because if that's the problem, I would also prefer a regular meeting being added, with timelines to it that you can add. You need to give at least, for example, 2 weeks notice to add a regular or standing, and give that flexibility. But that would have to be, to my knowledge, done within our procedural bylaw. And if we add that in, or we give direction to that committee to bring it, I suspect they'll do it anyway, because this is, I think, important. But if we want to give that direction to the committee to bring that element within the procedural bylaw to address the issue, I think that would be one way to do so, and to stay away from special meetings, because I do concur with most of council with the reservations that special meetings do bring. C. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Just upon reflection, the council procedure bylaw will need to be updated to reflect the changes to the meeting schedule anyway. So those changes can be considered in a revision to that bylaw brought forward to council. To answer your question, under 7.0 notice of council meetings, you're almost verbatim correct that the time, date, or location of the meeting can be changed, or the establishment of a special meeting can be called.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
So I guess I have a question then, because I pulled it up now, but it does, our bylaw does state it's the second and fourth Tuesday and the first and third Tuesday. So is the motion we passed earlier today not in violation of our own bylaw? Should it not be the bylaw that is changed, not the meeting schedule that's changed? Or do we need a subsequent motion that I'm kind of stuck on that one. If you need a motion to update I would assume you'd need a motion in the same meeting, or else it would render the previous one in violation of our bylaws. Sorry for running on a little bit on that one. Too many layers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. This may be something that administration needs to comment on to determine.
So if I may, and as we await administration's response, whether it's now or later, we, through precedents, have accepted I'm trying to think of the name, just a calendar every year with issues that conflict with the bylaw. And an example is the month of June, right? When we do our summer months, there's no meeting on Tuesday, on a Tuesday potentially, but that would conflict with the bylaw. So I think it's one of those things that technically, I agree with Councillor Nelson that they conflict, but I think through the precedents that it shows that if we approve this motion, this would somewhat supersede, although it's not confirmed anywhere. That's the practice we've been using. We've been adopting an agenda that conflicts with our bylaws anyway. So I don't see this as a big issue. I always use the barometer of would municipal affairs close the town of Hinton for passing a motion with a calendar that says in another bylaw that it must be on Tuesday. No, they wouldn't care about that. So, but it is a valid point to potentially address in the revision of our procedural bylaw to eliminate language of that nature. Councillor Stashy.
I guess I have a question then. I'm not sure who's best equipped to answer it, and it's a little bit hypothetical, but if in the event that a special meeting of council needs to be called to deal with some, not even necessarily emergent, just something that would have been covered at a regular meeting of council, how is the agenda for that developed? Is that because it's not something that is regularly gone through by the agenda review committee talking about upcoming meetings and stuff? So in that event, how is that handled? How is the agenda for that regular meeting that's going to be slotted into that fourth Tuesday? How's that developed? How's it handled? How's it vetted?
Teal Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. The way that would be handled would be through the agenda prep committee. So determining, after a need is established or an emerging item, quite similar to the items on the special meeting tonight, there was an emergent item that needed to be addressed and could not wait until the next regular council meeting. So discussion with the agenda prep committee to determine the need of the special meeting based on that criteria and that discussion, the decision to move ahead with a special meeting. At that point, administration took a look at other items that could have been added to the agenda and had reflected on that prior to that discussion. The trigger was that emergent item. The other items that are on that special meeting could wait. However, opening it up to a special meeting, it reduced the number of items on a future council meeting agenda, so they were added. But that was developed through discussion with the agenda prep committee on Thursday afternoon.
Can I follow up? So then that kind of goes back to Councillor Nelson's highlights about transparency and the agenda being put out. If there's items that would have been addressed at a regular meeting of council, the agenda would have been published on Friday. Council would have had 4 days to prepare. The public would have had a chance to take a look at it. And unfortunately, that is not going to be able to happen then in this situation. If the agenda planning committee meets on a Thursday and decides that it's important to have a slotted in regular agenda meeting on the following Tuesday, that's not sufficient time to get everything developed and out for Friday for council and the public, is it?
Teal Olson.
That's correct, and it wouldn't be enough time to get a report ready and get it to council for the Friday, and it would likely not be enough time to turn something around for earlier the week before, which goes back to the need for planning and to be reviewing the items and for administration to be taking time to discuss what's coming up and when, to alleviate the need for these things to happen as much as possible. So that items that are coming forward are emergent, but there is a line drawn so that there's enough time for, the preparation there has to be time in order to do that. And then as well to get the information to council ahead of time. If it's okay to defer to Ms. Hazel.
Further to CAO Olson's point, with respect to the meeting that is being held tonight, we knew as admin that we needed that meeting established. So those reports were worked on well in advance of the Thursday agenda prep meeting, so that it was just a yes or no on whether or not to move forward with that and then tacking it onto the agenda.
Teal Olson.
Sorry to just to add, and again, we're working a couple of weeks out on our reports as well. So we are looking to be in a better position to understand when these circumstances might arise.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Just to clarify, that's the way we can do it as agenda prep, but for a special meeting, we have, in my opinion, a very collaborative mayor and not one that's very hungry to drive his own agenda or her own agenda, but we're creating a template for future councils, and if the next mayor that comes in is powering, they could basically run with it, they wouldn't need the agenda prep committee because for special meetings, it's only the CAO and the mayor, and the deputy mayor, which kind of in some ways represents all of council, especially if it's turning over, would not need to be represented for special meeting approval, correct?
Tina Wilson.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So council, we have a motion on the floor. The conversation has touched upon special meetings a bit, on regular and standing. I could support this motion to some extent if it had the addition of directing the procedural bylaw committee to come back with guidelines on adding regular standings to the calendar. And if we gave that together and then there was guidelines specific to the special meetings of council, then I think it would address what I'm hearing around the table, which is avoiding having special meetings, adding regular standings, with parameters, of course. And in worst case scenario, if there is a last minute special meeting, that there are guidelines specific to it with minimum criteria. So I'll leave it at that for now. Councillor Nelson and Councillor Rees.
Yeah, I think everything you talked about, I think, can be accomplished through this motion if it's council rather than the committee. But especially hearing administration saying they need to update the bylaw anyway to reflect the meeting changes that we're doing tonight, I think and I don't think it requires a lot of work, but a simple verb change of add it to the change and change the date, time, or location could allow us at any point to call a regular meeting in place of a special meeting. So understand we're going to have it opened up and come back to council in the relatively short term anyways to be compliant to our bylaw. I think adding a change in there would be very simple to allow for the calling of a regular council meeting or a standing meeting of council. So I actually like it better now that we've had some discussion and a little bit of disagreement on it. I think it makes more sense now that it did when I made it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my thinking is, I'm hoping that our procedural bylaw committee gets together soon and does their little overhaul, and that this is part of the revamping of that procedural bylaw. So is this saying you want administration to bring this procedural bylaw back to us reflecting what it says up there? So admin's coming back to us, and then the procedural bylaw committee's coming back to us?
Mr. Justice, directed to me. The Council Procedural Bylaw Committee has not met in this calendar year. There's no formal schedule of when it will be meeting, and I'm hoping there's progress made on that when the new legislative services person comes in November. But I personally think it's the changes that we're looking to make to the procedural bylaw based on the feedback from all of council is a many months sort of a project. And there may and are things we need to change within it to make sure we're within legislation already. So if there's small changes that can be made immediately and just brought to council as a whole, I think that's probably a better strategy than waiting for what could be 6, 7, 8 months of procedural bylaw committee, especially having a new person within the organization and the community to get their feet wet and potentially have a lot of other things on their plate coming into a position that's been vacant for many months. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rees.
Thank you, sir. And so I am hoping that this will be the catalyst to have that procedural bylaw committee meet sooner rather than later. I think admin's got enough on your plate. You got enough reports that you're working on that you don't need to bring another one back. So I will not support this.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to reiterate now that there's been some discussion, I haven't changed my opinion on this proposed motion. I still don't feel that this is the best use of administrative time or council's time. And what I would hate to see is a hastily prepared report that changes the procedure bylaw that doesn't have enough time devoted to it to fully analyze the repercussions and potentially wind up with something that causes some additional problems that aren't foreseen. And I would much rather that the the Procedural Bylaw Review Committee have some time to take a look at it and fully analyze it and come up with a best solution moving forward rather than a quick solution. So I'm still not speaking in favor of this motion, although I definitely understand and share the concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council. I won't be speaking in favor. I would prefer a motion to direct the committee to come back with it, stating that there's a will of council to look at the special meetings. I prefer it to be special, regular, and standing meetings of council, and to direct the committee to do so. And that would then get the committee together, which they can do anyways. And the committee is Councillor Nelson and myself. But for council to be together on this and to publicly put forward a direction to the committee, I would support, but I do agree to direct administration without the committee. Right now, I don't support. Okay, council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question the council direct administration to bring back council procedural bylaw to reflect specific guidelines around special meetings of council to address the reduction in regular meetings of council. Council, those in favor? Opposed? Those defeated. Okay, council. Anything further for this section? Councillor Nelson.
I just a specific, do we need to put a motion on the table to update the bylaw to reflect the changes to the calendar?
C. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. If it's permitted, if administration could take a minute or two and just confer on this. I've looked at the procedure bylaw, and unfortunately there's nothing underneath the organizational meeting that dictates a process to changing the time and the date, and then the process for the bylaw and where that fits. If it's permitted, if we could take a 2-minute just to confirm.
We'll take a 3-minute recess. We'll come back at just after 5. I'd like to reconvene this meeting at 5:04. C. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, and thank you to council for allowing administration a couple moments to take a look at the procedure bylaw and to understand what's possible here. Under regular council meetings as well as standing committee meetings 5.2 and 5.3, in the first item underneath both of those items, unless council by resolution from time to time otherwise determined. So that's what took place tonight through the organizational meeting and the adoption of the option 2 for a schedule. So that's where it's reflected in the procedure bylaw just prior to the organizational meeting information.
Thank you, C. Olson. Councillor Nelson.
To me, the intent of putting from time to time means we occasionally make changes to it, such as FCM or AUMA, but from time to time wouldn't lay out that we're making a permanent annual change to how we perform meetings. Otherwise, it wouldn't say from time to time. Like,
Yeah.
and again, and I'm happy for administration, just if they find it necessary to bring it back as they see fit, but I read that in a very different manner personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. I read it quite the opposite. I thought it meant that from time to time we can make changes, which is this time. Yeah, tit for tat. Councillor Stashik.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and keeping in mind that I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of time to time in a legal document means at your discretion with no designated timeline. So it's just at your direction with no requirement to adhere to particular deadlines or timelines. So.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. I would like to make a motion.
Okay.
Alrighty, I would like to move that council direct the council procedural bylaw committee to bring the council procedural bylaw to reflect specific guidelines around special, regular, and standing committee meetings to a standing committee meeting. And a brief overview of the current status of the council procedural review.
What was the last word, sorry?
Council procedural bylaw review. And I'd just briefly like to speak to this. I have waited years to see this procedural bylaw get updated. To me, the procedural bylaw, that's how we do our job. That's how we know how to make a motion, how to rescind a motion, how to do a notice of motion. And really, whether we're in the next council or a brand new council comes in, we need this council procedural bylaw to be there for good guidance. We truly do. So the quicker we get this done, the quicker this group meets, the better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reese. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Nelson.
I'd like to move to split, kind of around the end of brief overview part, be on the second one.
This part you're even second.
Yeah, that's the natural separation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. So we'll be dealing with the first part of the motion. And Councillor Reese.
Thank you, sir. I had wanted to apply a date to that after the and. You know, if we don't have a date attached to this, it could linger on for, you know, quite some time. So I would say before the end of first quarter for sure. So, you know, we could have maybe 3 meetings in, and then you guys come back to us before the end of first quarter.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Reese. Okay, we have a motion, updated motion. Councillor Waugh.
I just wanted to check in with admin. Does that timeline work? Is that doable?
Councillor Olson.
Thank you very much. Well, yes, that works for me.
Councillor Nelson.
Although I understand the concept of it, I'm not sure that I would understand what this motion is asking, if it's 2 or 3 months from now, or if a new legislative services person just looked at the motion itself and didn't review a big chunk of the conversation. It just kind of says to bring the procedural bylaw to reflect guidelines, but it doesn't. It already reflects guidelines around those things, so I'm not sure really for changes or updates or more specifics, or just a these are the guidelines.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. If I can make a friendly amendment to Councillor Reese, because I share the same concerns, we can add to reflect specific guidelines around special meetings and adding regular and standing committee meetings. And that, I think, speaks to the conversation we had tonight. So we're talking about guidelines on the special, and we can, I'm open to, well, Councillor Reese can be open to other wording, but I think speaking to this conversation, it should have about adding the standing and regular meetings based on the organizational review conversation that we had. So there might still be some work with that, but that's would be my friendly amendment. Councillor Reese is okay with that. Councillor Reese.
Thank you, sir. My hope is, this is the end of March 2021. My hope is that the Procedural Bylaw Committee has 3 solid meetings in. So when they come back to us at the end of March, they're bringing this back to us, but you're also bringing any revisions to our current council procedural bylaw. So I'm fine with that.
Are you fine with the
I
friendly
am,
amendment?
but my big thing, I just want to get these meetings going.
Okay, council, we have a amended motion on the floor. Any debates, questions regarding this? Councilor Nelson.
I just want to confirm that Councilor Race is okay with the friendly amendment, because it's been a couple times, but I don't think she's actually confirmed that she's okay with the friendly amendment.
I'd like to see it. This is my motion, eh?
It's been amended multiple times, so I just want to make sure you were comfortable with it, because the chair asked, but there wasn't a specific response to it.
I am fine with what the mayor has added.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Any further discussion, comments? Councilor Nelson.
I did have a question. So my concern is I think the timeline is really optimistic. And my concern is that the council procedural bylaw update committee will be meeting and updating, and we'll have to basically bring back a partially completed procedural bylaw to hit this timeline. So that would be my concern, and it might be as simple as us asking for the committee recommending the council extend the timeline. I think March to have a completed council procedural bylaw update is based on what we've gone through so far, it's probably pretty unlikely. So if your expectations are tempered, and I'm fine with leaving it as is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Councilor.
I think my and was, and a brief overview of the current status of the review.
So
Split.
that's the second
That
part.
was split.
Yes.
So, Councilor Race, are you good?
What I want is what's gonna be good for all of council, what's gonna be, good for next council coming in. So anything that you guys need to do to clean this up, to make it work, and to get to work on this council procedural bylaw, I'll take it.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Councilor Haas.
If I may, I read it that by March 31st, what you're asking is this particular portion of it be addressed, whether or not the other portions of the procedural bylaw, but by March 31st, at least this is something that's cleaned up and addressed, is how I read it. So I mean, I don't think March 31st is, and I mean, I'm not on the committee, so I don't know for certain, but if it just, come back at least with this one matter cleaned up on special meetings and everything, and then, where are we at? How much longer will it take, or wherever at, whatever after that? But that's how I read it. So, and how I read it this way, I'd be in favor of this. So.
Thank you, Councilor Haas. Councilor Stashen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That brings me to a question too, then. If the intent is to only bring back the specific guidelines around special meetings and adding regular and standing committee meetings to a standing committee meeting before March 31st. So if that specific section gets brought back, what is the expectation of council in terms of dealing with that then? Is there an expectation that there's going to be an amendment proposed at that time that gets passed, and then subsequent amendments to address the other changes that have to come? So I'm a little bit concerned too, and agree with Councilor Nelson about the timeline. If the whole thing isn't ready by March 31st, what's the expectation that council is going to do with a portion of it?
Thank you, Councilor Stashen. Councilor Race.
Thank you, sir. My intent was to assist Councilor Nelson with his previous motion that did not go anywhere, where he was directing administration to bring back a report on this. So admin would be bringing back a report. We're requesting a report from Council Procedural Bylaw Committee. So I was hoping, instead of admin having to come back to us, that we would just have the Council Procedural Bylaw Committee come back to us. I would, if we're just dealing with this one thing, that first motion, our timeline can be way, way shorter. But if we're including any work being done on our current council procedural bylaw, that's 3 months, just to get some work done on it. But,
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Stash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if it's a report from the committee, that's different. That doesn't speak to a report. It speaks to bringing back the bylaw itself. So perhaps it needs to be amended again if the intent is to get a report back from the committee and not the actual bylaw itself.
So, sorry, Councillor Stash.
Yeah, no, that's just, I just wanted to point that out, that the wording doesn't define a report. It says to bring back the actual bylaw.
In hearing, I think there are multiple valid points on what our expectation would be at the end of March 31st, and maybe we tweak the date. But my course of action for this would be the committee implementing these changes as with all the other changes all at once. I wouldn't want it to come. Now the question then would be, can the committee bring forward a completed procedural bylaw by the end of March 31st that would include specifically these things? And albeit we haven't met in quite a while, but we did make some good progress for the few months that we were looking. I know Councillor Nelson is looking at me funny, but we did, but with obviously with COVID and Ms. Williams not being in the organization anymore, but we have somebody who's hired. I think we can commence, and that gives us 5 months to take the changes that we've already made, not officially, and to add this. And if we have to come before council to ask for an extension, I think that might be the best course of action. But my intent now with the change to the org review and this motion in front of us is that the committee does bring a finished draft to council by the end of March 31st. That would be my commitment as one of the 2 members of the committee to do so. But I'm open to Councillor Nelson if any input on that. If it's perhaps a month later, but I think 5 months is quite a bit for something that I think is important to do. Thanks. Okay, Councillor Haas.
So that being said, and I respect that the wording of this motion would then have to completely change, because this is just one specific part of it. We'd have to completely restructure it if that's the case. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Race.
thank you, sir. I am totally open to council's suggestion on changing any wording on this motion. I will take any assistance.
Councillor Nelson.
I guess kind of the motion aside, I think it's the responsibility of the members of that committee to make sure that council's wishes and desires are represented. We're simply funnels for the rest of council. And I know, part of the comment I made earlier about the interpretation about removing or adding, we've had a lot of those conversations already. And I feel relatively confident that this will be captured regardless of whether there's a motion or not. And it might be just more appropriate to withdraw this and direct the committee to bring back a final draft of the council procedural bylaw by March 31st, and understand that these changes would likely be in it, and if they aren't, it could be addressed at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Race.
I would certainly withdraw if I had, if I was confident that somebody would make the motion that you spoke to, that you just said.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. After hearing you as a member of the committee speak to the timelines and that they are potentially reasonable, I think the motion as presented is fine. It captures the discussion that we had today, that it's important to council, that forms a part of the procedure bylaw when it comes back. And if the timeline's feasible, then that means the rest of the changes come back at the same time. And to me, the motion's adequate as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Okay, council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question the council direct the council procedural bylaw committee to bring the council procedural bylaw to reflect specific guidelines around special meetings and adding regular and standing committee meetings to a standing committee meeting before March 31st, 2021. Council, all those in favor? That's passed unanimously. We have the second part of the motion. The council procedural bylaw committee provide a brief overview of the current status of the council procedural bylaw. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This one I have a bit of an issue with. I don't really understand what the intent of this part of the motion is, that what exactly is going to come back to council regarding the current status.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. My intent there was when they're bringing back that first information to us, I want to get a status report on where are they on their work on the council procedural bylaw. So that's when I had said I needed a date attached to that. So when they bring this back to us before March 31st, I want a status report on where are you, on working.
So I could follow up then. So in light of the motion that was just made, that the intent is to have the full bylaw come back to us by March 31st, it makes me wonder if there's a need now to have a status update at that point, and perhaps this portion of the motion could simply be withdrawn.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. I would also concur with that. The idea is we're bringing something to council before March 31st, 2021, which would then entail at least a committee meeting. And with that, there'll be a committee update at a regular meeting, whether it's in the month of January or February or even December for that matter. So to me now it's less relevant to have this direction. Councillor Race.
So my concern is March 31st, I don't want just specific guidelines around special meetings, regular and standing committee meetings. I want to know where is the council procedure bylaw committee on that whole procedure. Where are you? How many sections have you gone through? Are we just about completed? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want what we talked about tonight.
Right.
I want to know exactly where are you? How many meetings have you had? Is it working well for you? Are we making some headway? So, and I think the second one captures that. But
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Nelson and Councillor Stashik.
Yeah, no, it was clarified that the entire procedural bylaw is coming back by the end of March. The whole thing, done, completed. There could be an opportunity that council may want to extend that committee to handle emerging changes or things like that. March 31st is like that. As of tonight, the committee just got direction that is the expectation from council as to when that entire thing comes back. I don't think this is required. I think whether it's through council reporting or it's through, and I know at least for me personally, I reached out to every single member of council to ask questions about concerns about the procedural bylaw and specific things that we want to see. So I don't think this is required, and I'm sure you'll be getting tons of updates from me specifically as we discuss council procedural bylaw on a weekly basis for over 3 years. So I think we're good, and we'll bring back a whole draft before the end of March.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Race.
when
Or,
could
sorry,
you
my
drop that
apologies.
for me?
Pardon me?
Could you drop that screen a little bit?
Like that?
I'm afraid I'm coming across as being difficult right now, and that's not my intent at all, because I'm not a difficult person. But in that first motion, where does it say that we want a status update on our council procedural bylaw? That motion is specific to guidelines around special meetings, regular standing committee meetings. It's not saying we want to see where you're at in taking care of that procedural bylaw. Making the updates, making it better. So I might be missing something.
No, I think it's valid. There's the will of council. If we want to direct any committee to bring forward any update, we can do so, but the will of council will decide that, right? There's two arguments now. One is it's going to come organically through committee updates because we'll have to meet, because I'm sure it's going to take at least probably 3-4 meetings to get it done. And we'll have updates along the way. So I think that's the concept. There's no need, but like I said, every councillor has the option to put forward a specific direction to ensure it. Councillor Stash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to voice my understanding of the previous motion, and that was that council had committed the committee to bringing back a full draft bylaw by March 31st. So the status update, to my understanding, would be that the draft bylaw is complete and ready for council's review and potential passing, is my understanding of it. And that's why the question was about the status update, if that was current as of today, or if that was March 31st, or when the status update expectation was. Because if the expectation was March 31st, then my previous comment that it could potentially be withdrawn would be valid, because the full draft bylaw would be coming on March 31st or sooner, potentially. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stash. Okay, council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question that Council Procedural Bylaw Committee provide a brief overview of the current status of Council Procedural Bylaw. Council, all those in favor? Opposed? Those defeated? Council, any further clarification or questions? Councillor Nelson.
Would council, just so that we're clear and on our agenda or our action tracking and everything like that, it should, I'll just do it. I'd like to move that council direct the Council Procedural Bylaw Update Committee to bring back a complete draft bylaw no later than March 31st, 2021. And I think that just clarifies and carves into stone what the conversation was about previously. And again, I spoke earlier about how when we have a new person starting, it might not be clear what is being asked by motion. This lays it out clearly, and I look forward to committing ourselves to some pretty intensive work over the next few months to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. I'll be in support of this. Thank you, Councillor Nelson, for bringing that clarity, and I think we can leave this meeting knowing what to expect on March 31st. Council, any further debate? Councillor Race?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Nelson, I just want to thank you so much for bringing this motion forward in words that I could not bring to the table. So I will be speaking in favor of this.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council? Seeing none, call to question that council direct the Council Procedural Bylaw Update Committee to bring back a complete draft bylaw no later than March 31st, 2021. Council, all those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Anything further, Council? Before I turn it back to administration, we've been waiting patiently. Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Moving on in the report under the second heading includes the mayor's recommendations for councillor, boards, and committee appointments. They continue with the assignments as they are currently. If there's any questions of council for admin, we're pleased to accept them.
Thank you, C.O. Olson. Council. Councillor Stash.
I'd like to move that council approve the 2021 councillor, boards, and committee appointments. They don't need to speak to it.
Thank you, Councillor Stash. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Nelson.
Just for clarification, I believe every other time that we've done the appointments, it's always listed the people and the committees on which they sit. So I'm not sure if, oh, sorry, public, I'm good, thank you. Too far ahead.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councilor Nelson.
Just for council's consideration, understanding the now expedited timeline, it may be very difficult for me to be primary on 4 different committees if the expedited timeline. So I'm fine with it staying where it is, but between some of the committees that I sit on, there may be more requests for alternate substitutions than had been previous to the last motion that was made. But it's also uncertain what the youth schedule will look like and some of the other ones. So as it is right now, I'll do my best, but the expedited procedural bylaw can make it tricky to diligently do all the other ones as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. And I think Councilor Nelson brings up a good point in, I know it's new information tonight that the expectation for one of the committees has changed, and I think that's extremely valid. But always remember, I also sit as ex officio on all of the committees. So if the alternate has the inability of going there, just please reach out to me. And knowing this, I'll try to make some extra effort in making sure that there's no lapses in any attendance for the committees ongoing. But I do appreciate Councilor Nelson pointing that out, that it may be a challenging 3-4 months. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate or questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question that council approve the 2020-2021 councilor boards and committee appointments. Council, all those in favor? It's passed unanimously. And council, Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. The ballots for the public members to boards and committees have been tabulated, and the results can be shared through Ms. Way and Ms. Anderson in advance of council's direction or motion.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Through to the remainder of council, Ms. Anderson has prepared the motions for you with the names that represent the voting from earlier in the evening. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, administration. Council. Councilor Nelson.
I'd like to move that Jace Rush, Donna Christensen, Jalen Bertolin, Ross Griswold, and Mir Muhtadi Fayez to be appointed to the Community Engagement Advisory Committee for a 2-year term to the 2022 organizational meeting. And if I could actually speak to one point, we did ask in the brief time we were in camera if members of administration can sit on committees, and Mr. Fayez is a town employee, and within SEAC's terms of reference, they are permitted, and I think he'll be a great addition and a good lens for that committee, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Needless to say, I'd like to thank everyone who put their names forward for doing so. It's we have a strong volunteer committee or group in our committee. I'm losing it. In our community. Thank you very much for that. And we do see a lot of the names repeat themselves, but it's nice to see a few new names who haven't been on committees for a bit, and we look forward to it. So, with that, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? It's passed unanimously. Councillor Hawes.
I'd like to move that Jessica Hersey and Shirley Caputo be appointed to the Hinton Grant Funding Advisory Committee for a 1-year term to the 2021 organizational meeting. Perfect. If I can speak to it and just briefly, so this covers the three application periods, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And just to clarify too, that being that there's only 2, there's usually 5, so the rest of the committee would then be divvied up to the SEAC committee.
Actually, thank you, CEO. Wow, we're both losing it. Councilor Hawes. Yes, that's correct. However, one is, it can be split between SEAC and the library board. We have received indication from SEAC as well as the library board, that they each have one representative. We may seek an additional from either of those boards. However, if council did want to provide the direction to seek an additional from the youth council, we thought that might be an interesting mix-up as well. However, that's up to you guys.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I'd just like to speak to it. I mean, I thank these two for coming forward, and you know, the Hinton grant funding committee, you know, is maybe less money, but still very important money to different organizations and groups of our community. So I'm happy to see those two part of that, and excited to hear that, yeah, having other options to make up that group would be great from other committees. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hawes. Council, anything further? Seeing none, I'll call to question. Oh, sorry, Councilor Session.
Yeah, I guess it's related. So does administration require a motion of council to fill that, or for how to fill that fifth position then? Or how would that work?
Administration.
I'll defer to Ms.
Thank you, CAO Olson, through to Councillor Stashik. For the two being from SEAC and the library board, those have already been established through conversations with them. If council wishes to just keep the positions for the grant funding committee to be derived from SEAC and the library board, then we'll just go back to them and seek an additional person. However, if you wish to work outside of the terms of reference as they're currently written and establish that that fifth member come from, for example, the youth council, then that would require a direction at this time, or a motion at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Stashik and administration. Council. Seeing none, I'll call the question that Jessica Hirsi and Shirley Caputo be appointed to the Hinton Grant Funding Advisory Committee for 1-year term to the 2021 organizational meeting. Council, all those in favor? It's passed unanimously. Councilor Race.
I move that Amanda Wyarski and Hendrik Smith be appointed to the Hinton Municipal Library Board for a 3-year term to the 2023 organizational meeting.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Seeing no one, I'll call to question. All those in favor? It's passed unanimously. Councilor Nelson.
Lots of names, I'll do my best. I'd like to move that Emmett Crespins, Ethan Yonka, Cadence Rogiani, Liam Baxter, Lyle Underwood, and Maverick Cortez be appointed to the Hinton Youth Advisory Council for a 1-year term. And I can speak to it. I'm excited. There's a few returnees from the previous group that all participated really well, and I think had their experience cut short due to COVID. I'm looking forward to working with them again, and also looking forward to the new members and looking forward to what year 2 looks like. Understand we've got a lot of the terms of reference in place and a lot of the framework set, so I think we'll be able to hit the ground running a little bit faster than we did a year ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debates, questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? That's passed unanimously. And Councilor Ostashi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move that council direct administration to re-advertise directly with the schools to seek an additional. Sorry. Seek an additional, yeah, I was just reading it directly off the recommendation. And it says directly with the schools. I'm not sure if it was indirectly before, but directly with the schools this time, I guess. To seek an additional 2 students for the Hinton Youth Advisory Council. I could speak to it quickly. I think it would be good to fill that out with its full complement of students. Now that things have stabilized a little bit and everything's kind of getting to a It's not, definitely not normal, but at least it's a consistent pattern. There might be a little bit more uptake and we might be able to fill those last two positions. So I'd like to see that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate or questions? And seeing none, I'll question the council direct administration to re-advertise directly with the schools to seek an additional 2 students for the Hinton Youth Advisory Council. Council, all those in favor? It's passed unanimously. Councillor Nelson.
A follow-up question to that is, I'm not sure where administrative support for that committee is, but I wonder if one of the challenges might be the format of the meetings, understanding parents' concerns around COVID. If it is known that these will be hosted virtually, that might be helpful, especially for me as a member of that committee in sharing it and maybe engaging with some of the parents that may have had those concerns about, again, increased exposure to the students.
Administration.
Thank you very much. Through to Councillor Nelson. That can be included in the re-advertisement to alleviate any concerns about in-person meetings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Administration. Council, anything further? Councillor Stashik.
I'd like to make another motion. I'd like to move that an additional member be added to the Hinton Grant Funding Advisory Committee. From either the Youth Advisory Council, SEAC, or the Library Board. Again, I'd speak to it quickly. I think that also is important that that committee has also got its full complement, and I think it was a very interesting recommendation to have a member of the Youth Advisory Council sitting on that committee. I would like to see that. So the intent, and though it's not directly worded there, the intent is to try to get somebody from the Youth Advisory Council, but if that's not possible, to fill the 5th seat with somebody from SEAC or the Library Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a motion on the floor. I have Councillor Nelson, Hawes, and then Rice.
I'd like to propose an amendment just at the end to add, and if a suitable candidate has not been found, that the position be re-advertised. I guess now I'm just speaking specifically to the amendment. I think adding that allows it not to come back to council if there struggles to find candidates. I'll speak to the youth council and some of the challenges they might have in being part of that group. But just for the amendment, I think it just provides administration a bit more flexibility and it not having to come back to council again if they're not able to fill it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have an amendment, so we will deal with that first. I had Councillor Hawes in the queue.
Dealing with the amendment,
It was simply
Yeah.
the amendment.
I can, if I can stay the other Kim as well. I don't know if this is necessary, because I mean, I'm confident enough that between the SEAC, even if the youth advisory doesn't go on, but between there's enough members of SEAC and there's enough members of the Hinton Municipal Library Board to fill those spots. I don't think necessarily we have to re-advertise it. I wouldn't know, I wouldn't think that we'd have to re-advertise to make sure that those spots were filled, to be honest with you, with the members that are there. So I don't think I'd be speaking in favor of this.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. With that, I'm going to go to administration, see if there's any clarity on that process.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, through to both Councillor Nelson and Hawes. Due to where we're at in the funding schedule, while I appreciate admin not having to return if we did want to re-advertise, we don't have enough time to re-advertise and also fulfill the grant. So, I mean, if we get super hooped, that's helpful. However, we would be looking to fill this immediately from either board.
Thank you, administration. Councillor Race.
My question, thank you, sir, is more for the main motion and not the amendment.
So we'll deal with that after. Okay, council, so we have the amendment on the floor right now. Any further debate? Councillor Stashik?
Just in light of what administration says, I won't be supporting the proposed amendment. Not because I disagree with it, but because I understand the time limitations that make it not feasible. So I do appreciate the sentiment. I think that would have been a great qualifier to throw in at the end, so it doesn't have to come back to council. But I understand admin's concerns, so I won't support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council? Councillor Nelson?
I guess I had a question. So if a candidate is found within one of those committees, that would come back to council. Is that expected to come back on the 3rd to regular council?
Administration?
Based on the terms of reference, they're not required to come back to council. So for example, with SEAC, we simply, as a group, voted. Well, they did not get a vote, and they chose an individual. So we would go through the same practice with youth council.
If I could follow, so if this motion was approved, that candidate would then have to come back to council because it's outside the terms of reference? So it makes it a really bad motion?
No.
Just the re-advertise part?
Just the amendment.
Correct. So if we re-advertise, it would have to come back to council, which makes it
Correct,
a
because it would
really,
be a
really-
member of the public. Yes, absolutely.
So with that in mind, I'm going to withdraw my motion that was bad before I asked that question and now just really bad. So yeah, with council's permission, I'd like to withdraw.
Council, any objection to withdrawing this motion? Seeing none, motion is drawn.
Or amendment withdrawn, I guess.
Amendment? Council, we're back to the main motion. That's Councillor Haas.
Yeah, I just have a question real quick and then a comment based on the question, the answer to the question. What ages again or grades are the youth advisory council made of in these questions?
Administration?
Yes, thank you, CIO Wilson. Off the top of my head, I cannot recall. If you give me a moment, I can look through their applications. That's all in there.
8 to 10? Well, my only concern, and I really like the idea, my first reaction was to this, being a person that sat on that committee though, for applications. My only concern is of the age of the group. It is a lot of information to take in a very short period of time. It's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of budgets, it's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. And I'm not saying that the youth can't make good decisions based on, but I'm just concerned about the amount of information that they have to consume within less than a week. They must meet as a group for a day. I'm just not sure that might fit for this particular committee, unfortunately. Like I said, my first knee-jerk reaction was a great idea. I'm just not sure if that particular council, especially getting their feet wet in municipal government and making decisions and things like that and learning, maybe someone that's in grade 11, 12 or something like that, potentially, but I'm just not sure if this advisory committee fits the need for that committee right at this moment. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Race?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is basically along the same lines as Councillor Haas. Is there an age requirement, like to sit on a board or a committee? Like 16 and be on the committee, or?
Administration?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. That would be within the committee's terms of reference, and I don't believe that there is an age requirement that it has been established in that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, if I could speak, I'll actually speak in favor of it. I think it's highly unlikely that the logistics would allow the youth advisory council to submit a member because it hasn't met yet, it hasn't finished appointing. So in order to turn it around that quickly, I think it's unrealistic, but I think leaving it on there doesn't hurt anything, and it could result in something unexpected and great. The committee is grades 8 through 12, and ultimately, if that committee decided that there were members within it that had the maturity, ability to look at the numbers and all of those things to be suitable for that, then I think, albeit really unlikely for this year, I think it'd be a really great experience to provide a different type of feedback, but also part of it is for them to learn. And looking at the members of that committee that are on it now and have been on it for the last decade, I think it'd be incredible for, you know, a grade 12 to go and sit in a room with those people and learn from them. I do think there could be scheduling conflicts as well, because most of the grant funding meetings are during the day. So it requires some special permissions from teachers and parents. And so it'd be tricky, but I like leaving it there. I think it signals something really positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. I'll be speaking in favor. There's a ton of checks and balances. They have to get voted in. It's simply a recommendation committee. It comes to council. They're the minority of the board. If the entire Hinton Grant Funding Advisory Committee was made of the youth committee, then I share those concerns, because then it's all in there. But I think it's a good opportunity for youth to show themselves, and well, let's be honest, there might be somebody from the youth committee that will do the best job on that. Who knows? There are some phenomenal students in our community, so there's checks and balances in place. I do see the concern, but I'll support it the way it is. Councillor Haas.
Yeah, and I'm going to support it as well. I think it's a great idea. A mentorship, I think, would be also a really great opportunity for if one of them wanted to mentor with one of the community to go over those applications and consider some of those things, and even if potentially be part of that meeting and have some insight, potential. But yeah, no, I'm completely in favor of the youth, any opportunity for our youth to be involved. It just concerns of the amount of folks. Thank you.
Councillor Haas. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the inclusion of the Youth Advisory Council Committee member was intentional on my part. I think it's a great opportunity for a young person in our community to get on a committee that actually, that does something that's real and concrete to help some of the nonprofits in our group. It's a great learning experience for them. And I think if it's possible to have one, it would be a good thing to have. As Mayor Michael said, it's just an advisory committee. There's no commitment that comes out of that other than the advice that's given to council. And I just think it would be an awesome opportunity. And if in the event that they can't, then it can be filled by a SEAC member or library board member, which is in line with the terms of reference as it currently exists. So I think it's a good addition, and if it could work, I'd be pretty excited to see that. If not, we'll move forward. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question that an additional member be added to the Hinton Grant Funding Advisory Committee from either the Youth Advisory Council, Community Engagement and Advisory Committee, or the Hinton Municipal Library Board. Council, all those in favor? It's passed unanimously. Council, anything further? Administration? And if not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn with a 5-minute recess to the next meeting. Councillor Nelson.
I'm just going to make a motion to adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, all those in favor? And that's passed unanimously. We'll reconvene.
Tyler?
Hello, everyone. I'd like to call this special meeting of council to order at 6:01. Council, any additions or deletions to today's agenda? Administration? I will accept a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Haas.
Make a motion to accept the agenda of special meeting council October 20th, 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Council, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Action items, the first this evening, Beaver Boardwalk Section H, minor repair. See those.
Thank you, Mayor Michael. Upon review, the maintenance work that was approved to commence by AEP, a prioritization exercise was completed by Community Services. This item has also been discussed at the BEBO committee meeting a couple of weeks ago. Section H, east of Happy Creek, is a section that's currently closed, but that could reopen with about a day's worth of maintenance work, allowing for the full reopening of the south loop. This work needs to be initiated prior to the freeze, which could be any time now apparently, and therefore was included in the special meeting agenda because it's of some urgency. Council had provided some previous direction not to commence with any maintenance work in areas that are currently closed, and administration is seeking an approval from council to allow for the repair of this closed section only to be funded from the 2020 operational budget and work to commence after today. If council has any questions, Mr. Von Claveren is on the screen there and can assist in answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, CAO Olson. Council. Councillor Stashik.
I'd like to move the council approve the repair of Beaver Boardwalk, section H. It's the recommendation, Wendy. Located east of Happy Creek with the allocated 2020 operational maintenance budget to reopen this area for public use. So I just speak to it quickly. We talked about this at length at the Vivo committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, and it's, the cost and time commitment to opening this section is really minimal, and it doesn't affect the ability to keep or reopen or to continue maintenance on any of the currently open sections, and it doesn't affect the budget. So it's a bit of a win to get a section reopened despite the previous motion to concentrate efforts on currently open ones. It creates a loop around the Happy Creek portion, and it's a portion that we've gotten quite a bit of feedback from the community so far that they would like to see reopened if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Nelson.
I have a question in regards to funding. I have the budget in front of me, and apologies for not looking through it. I'm not seeing that code that's part of it. And what spurred me looking into it is, are we able to use I believe we had 2019 carry forward budget. Could we not make sure that we're using the 2019 carry forward budget instead of the 2020 budget?
I'll defer to Mr. Von Claveren for some clarification on the budget utilized.
Thank you, of course, and third Councillor Nelson. So basically the funding for 2019, because it was part of the operational budgets, those are not carried forwards. They stayed into the reserves, and there was 60,000 per year allocated towards the repairs if they would be possible. So it's just the allocated monies for 2020 and no carry forwards from 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Van Claveren. Councillor Nelson. Council. We have a motion on the floor. Any further questions? Debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question the council approve the repair of Beaver Boardwalk section H located east of Happy Creek with the allocated 2020 operational maintenance budget to reopen this area for public use. Council, all those in favor? It's passed unanimously. Council, anything further for this action item? None. Thank you, Council and Administration. We'll move on to the 2020-2021 golf course operating consideration.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Council's previously provided direction to administration to proceed with establishing a one-year operating agreement with the Hinton Golf Society to run from October 31st, 2020 to October 31st, 2021. The golf course operating agreement is in its final stages of preparation. However, upon the review of the asset acquisition agreement, some unbudgeted expenses were determined and a financial decision is required by council on the cost recovery established in the agreement. An opportunity to mitigate these financial impacts can be seen through determining the extent to which costs can be recouped through the operating agreement. Administration has consulted with the Golf Society and they've indicated that these operating costs have been included in the presentation received by council and as they make up a portion of the Golf Society's budget for 2021. With the transfer of assets through the acquisition agreement to close shortly, the need for formal financial and operational oversight by council and administration to the Golf Society is no longer needed for that purpose. With the removal of oversight to the society, the cost recovery achieved through the operating agreement, the business of golf would continue to be managed by the Golf Society, and the town would effectively become, lack of a better term, a landlord. Ms. Wade is present tonight to assist in answering any questions. We are happy to receive from council at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Council? Any questions, Councilor Nelson?
I think this is something we spoke in camera a little bit about, but removing council administration to me seems counterintuitive to what the public's expectation of the organization was when we took on that asset. I know there's a huge push that if we're going to be signing on the dotted line on many things, there needs to be that oversight. I'm just curious what makes us more comfortable now not having council and administrative oversight than a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago when the decision was originally made.
Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michael. So the original intention of council and administration and their oversight to the Golf Society was in regard to the loan amount, the $1.5 million, to ensure that administration and council were aware of any shortcomings or developments that might impact the repayment of that loan. Because they have defaulted on that and the asset has transferred to town ownership, that requirement for that purpose is no longer needed.
Councilor Nelson?
So if I could follow up, so it's conceptually it's more, and might be not the best example, but something like the Hinton Center where we own the building and maintain the building, but we contract out the operation of that building.
Administration.
Yes, that's a good comparison as well. I believe the path is run quite similarly.
Perfect. I appreciate that feedback. I think, having those discussions in camera, that's one of the, I think the biggest challenges publicly about removing oversight is what that looks like and what that means. So I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Councilor Hobbs?
I guess along that line though, we do have not oversight, but a council member on the ASH committee versus now we're suggesting not having a council on the Golf Society, correct? Which is similar in nature to so just any insight as to why one, not the other, potentially?
Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. And there was some conversation about additional considerations for this movement held in camera with council.
Mm-hmm.
So the removal of the oversight based on the objective that it served primarily, as well as those other reasons that we discussed in camera, to delineate the council and administration's role and the Golf Society's role to the operating of golf or the business of golf, and then the ownership of the assets, and kind of clarify those roles and responsibilities.
Thank you, Councilor Hobbs. Councilor Nelson.
I'd like to move that council approve the removal of council and administrative oversight of the Hinton Golf Society within the 2020-2021 golf course operating agreement. I'm actually really comfortable with where we're at with the golf course. I really respect the work that the society has done. I really look forward to what they're doing in the coming years. This year, I think has been a glimpse into what is possible for the golf course when you start putting in some innovation and creativity in there. I think it's going to go in a great way. So I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councilor Reyes.
Thank you, sir. So let's say things did go sideways from the golf course. We're the landlord, they're our tenant. Who would they just now come to you with their concerns?
Administration.
They could come to administration with any concerns that they would need to be brought forward. The other thing to note is that this is for a 1-year operating agreement, and there will be an ability to review and reflect on how this year has gone, as well as to look at a long-term either an operating agreement or solution for the golf course moving forward past that date.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Reyes. Council. Seeing none, we'll close question, the council approves the removal of council administrative oversight of the Hinton Golf Society within the 2020-2021 golf course operating agreement. Council, all those in favor? Opposed? That was carried 5-1. Councilor Nelson.
Procedurally, do we need to do anything with our recently approved council committees, or is that something that just subsequently takes care of itself?
Administration.
That, I believe, this motion would affect that council boards and committee schedule.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Councilor Hawes.
I'd like to move that council approve the 100% cost recovery for maintenance and operations of the golf course, lands, buildings, and operating equipment, and inclusive of charges related to insurance and utilities with the 2020-2021 golf course operating agreement. And just to speak to it, I mean, it's the cost that it does to do business as golf, and it has been budgeted by the Hinton Golf Society in their budget for next year. So I think it only right that it's 100%. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hawes. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate, questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? It's passed unanimously. Council, anything further? Councilor Nelson.
I'd like to move the council approve 100% cost recovery based on a fee for service with respect to golf course road and building maintenance where road clearing does not take precedence over the clearing of other town roads within the 2020-2021 golf course operating agreement. This is just one other way to de-risk this project for both parties, and I appreciate the level of detail of the motions required for this operating agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any questions or debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? That is also passed unanimously. Council, anything else for this action item this evening? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Council and Administration. That'll bring us to our land management framework. Cia Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. A land management framework assists the town in creating short and long-term strategic direction for land in Hinton. Through this document, a formal process for the management and use of town lands is proposed in order to give a sense of the big picture when it comes to land decisions, and then subsequently to be broken down into policies and procedures that support the overall direction for town land. I won't say too much more. Mr. Van has prepared a short presentation to take council and the public through the land management framework, what that entails. The direction that administration is seeking tonight on this item is to begin preparation of the policies and procedures related to the land management framework, and in addition to support alignment with the asset management policy and strategy, and further to establish a strategic land reserve in the 2021 budget for future land needs. I'll hand it over to Mr. Van to take us through his presentation.
Great. First slide. So what's the purpose of having a land management framework in the first place? I think one of the things to understand relative to land is that it's a finite resource. We're not making any more of it. We have to manage it as best we can because it's an asset under our asset management, but it's also an asset which we build things on. It's one of those cornerstone assets in which if you didn't have the land, you wouldn't have the recreation facilities, you wouldn't have the roads, you wouldn't have a place to put water and sewer, you wouldn't have a place to recreate. So that's an example. So this framework is intended to provide, how do we manage our land? What's the process? What types of things do we manage? How do we manage it? And how do we sort of go through that process? The other thing to kind of note here, and it's really important when we're thinking about land in Hinton, in particular, the thing to note is that, when we look at all of the public lands that are in Hinton, when you look at road right-of-ways, when you look at the amount of land that the town owns, when you look at crown land, it's like 60% of the land mass inside the town's boundary. Like that's a fairly significant amount. If you compared it to any other town or jurisdiction in Alberta, outside of, let's say, with Buffalo or something like that. I mean, it's really quite significant. And the reason for pointing that out is because it really defines the character of this community. We talk a lot about how we're a tree community, there's lots of recreation and everything like that. Well, that's because of how the land is defined. Next slide. So the important thing I wanted to ensure is we've sort of seen something like this as part of the asset management presentation. We have a line of sight that really takes us from council's strategic plan and the things that you're trying to accomplish as part of your strategic plan, down to how the administration is organized, how the community is organized, our municipal development plans, our community sustainability plans, the asset management plan, all the way down to this framework. The role that the framework plays in setting up how policies are then set up. This is really important because if you don't agree with the framework, then it becomes difficult to establish policies, which are also approved by council in terms of how we acquire land, how do we deal with recreation lands, how do we deal with different kinds of lands that we own. So it's really important that we sort of, and it's important that you see that there is a line from what your vision is right down to how we actually implement them on the ground. Next. So these are probably you recognize these guiding principles. These are the same guiding principles that are in your council policy related to asset management. So we use these same guiding principles when we were formulating how we want to actually lay out the framework, because in essence, we're talking about an asset inside the asset management framework, and therefore it's important to use the kind of same guiding principles when we talk about it. So those being having something that's well balanced, transparent, organizational accountability, systematic, and so forth, in terms of how you flow through your decision making on how you proceed through the process. Next. When we look at land in Hinton, it's not exactly a small amount of capital when you think about our assets. They're really totaling an amount of almost $20 million in terms of our total assets. So although it's only 8% of all of our assets, when we think of water, sewer, fixed assets, roads, those type of things, it's still a significant amount of money when we look at it. Next. Here we have the different types of land inventory that there are in the town. It's a bit misleading in some respects. So the different types we have are fee simple, which are basically we own a title, and we buy and sell. We can buy and sell that quite easily. It's the same as your house. Your house is fee simple title. Then we have municipal reserves. Municipal reserves are the type of things that are dedicated usually at the time of development by a developer. And they can be used, they can only, under the act, they can only be used for specific things like parks, recreation, that type of thing. There's environmental reserves. Those under the act are very specific in what they can be used for. Generally speaking, they're used for areas around water bodies, hazard lands, those type of things, and so they're very specific. Community service reserve, that tends to be areas, so it's very similar to municipal reserves. Those would be dedicated at a time of development. They may be used for schools, they may be used for parks, and so forth. Public utilities, those are specific under the Act, and they're specifically corridors that you would have for utilities. So whether that's water, sewer, gas lines, etc. They tend to be fairly major, but we also have used them, and we do continue to use them for things like walkways between neighborhoods as well. So they serve a dual function. In the case of something like a walkway between neighborhoods, they also sometimes serve a function of overland drainage between two areas. So the misleading part about this is that when we look through our inventory that the town has, we have different lands, such as under the fee simple, that we use for parks and recreation purposes. So that's why I say it may not be necessarily designated under land titles as a municipal reserve, but it is an active park where we do have a facility on it. For example, the town hall, the government center would be located on something like it, something that's fee simple. So that's just, I just wanted to point that out. Next. So what I wanted to do now is sort of walk you through what the framework looks like and the different layers that are in the framework and sort of what happens as part of this. So generally speaking, there's a trigger that happens at the top end. So that might be something there might be something we discover that's an unauthorized use on town land. Somebody's actually squatting or doing something on town land. It may be something on an external request that we get. So somebody wants to use our land, or somebody wants to, let's say, buy our land or acquire land. So that's an external request. The inventory review, the inspections. So it might be something that we come across as we're kind of looking at our land that we come across that needs to be changed. The strategic land review. So council, and a good example is that as part of council strategy, you identified that you wanted to do some community housing or some affordable housing. That's a strategic land item that comes up. And then lastly, something like a corporate or council priority, which is very similar to that aspect of it. And so underneath those triggers, there are three areas that we'll kind of go through, but there's a layer of a decision. It's a use of land, it's an acquisition, or it's a disposal of the land. And you kind of go on the next layer, which is basically, then what do? You sort of review it, you look at the guiding principles and how they apply, and then you make a decision. After the decision gets made, then there's a whole number of action of things that happen. So you might get an agreement together, you might purchase some land, you may sell some land, you may, acquire an easement over a right of way, that type of thing. So we'll go to the next slide. And so these are the three sort of layers that you kind of go through: the land review, the principles, and the decisions. So next slide. So when we look at the land review, it's not, what we do today is we review it out to different departments for their review. We revert to different provincial agencies for their review if it's necessary to do that. But these are all the different factors that we sort of look at when we're kind of going through it. We look at provincial legislation, we look at council strategic plan, we look at the characteristics of the land. Is there a financial budget to actually do something with the land, that type of thing, or is there a master plan related to it, or is it part of our, how does it relate to the MDP or area structure plans or outline plans relative to that? And what policies might be affected. So we look at all those different items to kind of come up with an idea of, well, what's impacting or what's affecting this land, and what decision might come out of that as a result of all of these pieces of legislation. Next. So then we look at the guiding principles. So the guiding principles are important in this particular case because it kind of gives us a full-rounded approach when we're looking at it. So well-balanced approach to this is that, we'll look at it from from an economic, environmental, and social perspective, right? To see what is this land for? What have we been using for? What's the impact of what we want to do with it? How does it relate to those different things? And how do you sort of balance those different interests of it? Because different departments will come to the table with different interests, right? Somebody might say that's a future road right of way. Other people may say, well, we're using it for recreation purposes, or there may be a wetland on it or something. So there may be three conflicting issues that you sort of have to resolve on that particular thing. Transparent. It's really important when we're dealing with public land that we're transparent about how we deal with it. So if there's a course of action that needs to be taken on that public land, then it's an open and transparent thing. The only thing that, let's say, goes into camera is when you're actually doing the transaction of something. And so that's under FOIP, that's about the only thing you can relative to land, right? But other than that, the process is transparent. When people come to the development counter, we explain to them if they're encroaching on a property, kind of go through a process, and it's transparent in terms of what the process is, how long it'll take, and what are the different steps as far as that process is, and so forth. So we kind of go through all of these different layers and different filters when we're looking at it to sort of give us, like I say, another aspect of that complete picture of what's involved in this, involved in the property. So I'll run through some examples that are in the framework and kind of show you how those sort of work. So determining an unauthorized use of land. So that might be, so there's a trigger. Somebody's trying to sell their property. They do a real property report. It identifies that they have a shed that's actually in our walkway, or that it's in a park reserve or something like that. So we kind of look at it and say, well, we come across this, we do the land reserve, or we do the land review on this. We go through the different interests that we've talked about in terms of legislatively, in terms of how does it fit into what we're trying to do in terms of the framework. And then we kind of say, yeah, we come to an authorized decision that, you know what, we can, let's say, give a lease on this particular piece of property, or we can't give a user agreement on this particular piece of property, or it may be that it has to be moved off the town's property. So we go through that type of evaluation when we're looking at it. Next. So then there's the unauthorized piece, and the unauthorized piece is something where somebody has come across and somebody's deliberately done that. And so it kind of goes through a very kind of similar kind of thing, but we might receive a complaint that somebody's doing this, or that somebody, one of the staffers out in the field, and they see this happening, and so that's how it sort of comes up. And then we go through a similar kind of review process, and then and at the end of the day, we make the decision: what are we going to do with it? Is it something that we then have to get legal action to sort of get that unauthorized use off of there? Or is it something that we potentially could license? How are we going to deal with it? And so we make that decision. Next. So there's the acquisition by dedication. So this is really where we have a developer or some developments happening, and through the act, we're entitled to up to 10% dedication for municipal reserve. And that's where we also, let's say, take environmental reserve and those type of things. So that's when that is dedicated to the town. And so under the act, it would stipulate the amount that you can be dedicated, that amount, and we can do a number of different things. So we can decide where, how much are we going to take, when do we take it, and how do we take it, basically. So under the act, you can basically take it as land. You can defer it to the balance of a quarter section, or you can take cash in lieu. And so this is a really good example of where the next step is to develop the policy in terms of how would you take reserve when it comes up. And so it may be, let's say, for example, in an industrial area, you may take the cash in lieu so that you can take that money and put it into where you actually want to develop trails or parks or those type of things, right? Or if it's a small subdivision, you may defer, instead of taking tiny little pocket parks everywhere, you may say you owe, 0.1 of a hectare. Well, you can't do much with 0.1 of a hectare. So what you would do is you would defer it to the balance of that development area, right? So in an area, part of an area structure plan, you would identify where your parks and trails are going to be in that area structure plan. So as development is happening, you would sort of take these pieces of reserve and you would transfer it to the area where you want to take your park and your trails. So that's how this process would work. Next. Determining active acquisition of land. So this is where we're looking at things such as we need a road wide. We need a road widening, or we need to acquire a park somewhere, or let's say we want to acquire land for community housing, that type of thing. So this is really a strategic acquisition, and it sort of falls in under, we identify the need, we kind of go through the review, we kind of look at how it kind of will follow through the process. We then decide, like, is this part of a right of way? Is this part of a lease or a license? Are we doing this? Is this a crown disposition, or are we acquiring it from the crown? And we kind of go through that filter of what it is, consider it, and then you kind of determine, are you going to pay for it? Are you going to, when do you acquire it? Is it a venture? Is it part of the operating? Those type of things. And so you kind of flow through this process, right? And at the end of the day, it's council that ultimately makes that decision whether or not they want to actually acquire the property. But council is also part of the process when it comes to budgeting, identifying how does it fit in with your strategic objectives and those type of things. So council would be, would flow through this entire process. Good example might be, the golf course as an example. So that might be where you acquired the land and you sort of are looking at the assets, and you're kind of looking at, going through a similar kind of process like this in order to, at the end of the day, acquire the asset. And or if you wanted to build a road, you're going to do the kind of similar thing as well. Next. So this just kind of gives you an idea. So not only do we have lands that are within the town's boundary that are freehold or municipal reserve or those type of things, we also have a fair amount of land within the town's boundary and even outside the town's boundary that's actually a crown disposition. So the crown disposition, or the crown land, is, we don't own it, we would rent it or lease it. So similar, so what it would be for, so we have different dispositions that are here. So some of them are for recreation purposes. The golf course is there as well. So that's a recreation one. Maxwell Lake is an example. Where the disc park, disc golf is another recreation lease. And so you have these different kinds of leases, even where the reservoir is. The Thompson Reservoir is on crown land. So we would have leased that from the crown in terms of a long-term disposition. And why do we do that? Because it's sometimes easier for the town to be able to do that. Certainly probably costs the town a lot in cost as well as time. Right now, if you wanted to acquire land from the crown, it's at least a 2-year process for the town to be able to do that. And that's probably optimistic. And then you would have to pay market value. So they would have to determine what market value is. And you'd have to pay market value to do that. So this golf is probably a really good example where they were able to obtain a crown recreation lease for very cheap, but it's specific for a specific purpose, right? So that's why you might do that as an example. Next. And so the last one is really determining when you want to dispose of land in the town. And so there may be various reasons why you want to do that. But generally speaking, you would kind of go through these different filters of why we have it, are there all these other plans in place, or what's the legislation, and go through the various, the guiding principles that you went through. And that would really tell you what you want to do with the land. So I'll give you a good example. So there may be an opportunity from an economic development purpose that you may want to help to facilitate some kind of economic development in your community. It may be on a parcel that you happen to own, but it really kind of goes through the balancing. So you would ask, do we have any other existing plans on that? Or are there other infrastructure in the ground that on this land that might affect what you want to do? And like I said before, at the very beginning, land is an asset. So when you bring an asset to the table, you're really trying to get you're dealing with taxpayers' dollars, and you're trying to ensure that you're getting the best benefit for the taxpayers as a whole. And I think that's a really important piece of the equation. And so this is sort of the process that you do. You have that, that trigger that triggers it. You go through the review, you go through the circulation, and at the end of the day, if you're disposing of land, it depends what kind of land it is, right? So if it is a fee simple kind of piece of land, then you don't have to go through a public hearing. It's council's decision at the end of the day on how you dispose of it. If it's a piece of road right of way, or if it's a municipal reserve, there's a whole other process in behind it. So you have to have a public hearing, you have to go through the disposition process, a formal disposition process, etc. If it's a roadway or a laneway or something like that, or if it's a park that you're trying to dispose of that you no longer need, or that type of thing, right? So that really, and so I think it's important when you're looking at this, you sort of want to look at a number of different factors, right? So it is that balance, that economic, social, environmental balance that you want to look at. And when you're looking at dispositions, you want to look at ensuring that it's the best value for the town in terms of how you're disposing of it and what you get out of it. Normally, if you're disposing of a piece of property, because it becomes an economic benefit, becomes a social benefit to the community, that you want to do that. And sometimes, for example, if you're doing like the housing, it may be that you're doing a partnership with somebody in order to achieve that economic and social benefit for the community. Okay, that's it. So any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Van. Council, any questions? Councilor Race?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few. So it says this framework provides a guide. What are we doing now?
So we currently do we currently do have processes in place. They're at the department level, and so, for example, if somebody wants to lease part of a walkway from us, we have a process for that. If someone wants to buy a parcel of land from us, we have a process for that. What this is trying to do is formalize that, and so this framework is trying to put it into context for council and for the public. And the next steps are really important because we would then be developing, we do have some policies in place, but we need to review those and update those policies. Plus we have to add some policies that will help really, they're the bones, or they're the skeleton to this framework, right? Or actually the framework's the skeleton. This is really the policies become the meat on the bones to really fulfill what you're trying to do, right? So yes, we do have a process for a lot of these things, but it isn't formalized in the sense of, yes, we write it down, we show people what the process is, but is it necessarily, has council necessarily seen it? No, you haven't seen it. So it becomes more of an administrative directive as opposed to funneling out of a council policy.
Yeah, that's just a quick question. So all these steps, are they in one specific document, or are they kind of all over the place? The current.
Well, currently we have one policy in place, right? So what we need to do is we need to beef it up. Like most municipalities will have a policy on how you deal with municipal reserves. They'll have a policy on how you deal with dispositions of property. They'll have a policy on how you acquire property. So they'll have council policies on how to do these things, and then you end up with the directives on the step by step. So what we have now are the step by steps on how you do it, and those would likely slide into the directives that we would have, that we would bring to council and show council what those directives are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Councilor Nelson?
But I'd actually like to make a motion. I'd like to move that administration.
Is this a different one?
Yeah, totally different. brings a high-level report regarding land management framework and its relationship to the planning and development hierarchy, to a standing committee meeting, no later than January 31st, 2021. Thank you. And if I could speak to it, I'm genuinely feeling confused about the overall relationship with all of our planning documents. I think it was last year we received a hierarchy which goes through, I don't know, a dozen different documents and ongoing work in progress. And to me, much of what's in this framework feels like the land use bylaw, the municipal development plan, and talking about people going to the counter. We have so many different plans in place. We keep creating more plans, and I guess I was a little bit caught off guard by this framework because it's never really shown up in whether it's asset management or planning hierarchy. It hasn't really existed up until now, at least in what I was expecting to come forward, and I'm struggling to really understand the purpose of it. I'm also struggling to figure out whether it is, to me, it feels very administrative, and a process administration does, but it actually falls above our policies, which to me is atypical from what our role as council is. To me, we would set the policies and the framework would come out of the policies and not vice versa. So to me, we're kind of hamstringing our policies by a document that really I'm just not prepared to build anything from framework until I understand it better. And I don't want to spend 3 hours tonight asking 100 different questions in its relationship with the other documents. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor.
So if I could just clarify as well, this doesn't prevent any other direction or motion from happening. So I just wanted to capture it early for my own peace of mind. But if people want to make every recommended action, that still can take place. So this doesn't prevent us from doing anything that's been recommended if council is comfortable doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor, a motion on the floor. Councillor Race.
The questions I have nothing to do with the motion, but this is a perfect opportunity for us to ask a director questions in regards to the presentation you just met. So.
Yeah, I'm fine with that because there's a motion on the floor right away that's high level. The other option is we table this and we allow for other questions and to get sort of things aired out before making a decision on this, but that's up to the will of council. But I will allow questions to administration that don't exactly pertain to this because it does have an implication on the overall movement of council going forward. So, Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, if I could, this just means before January, we get to have a conversation with this in the bigger context of our planning development. It doesn't prevent any other questions being asked. You can ask a million questions tonight. And any of the so it doesn't prevent us from doing anything else that we want to do tonight. It's just for my peace of mind and what I think citizens will expect and be asking me of is they'll want to know how it fits into the bigger picture. So thank you.
Councillor Stachek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move that this motion be tabled until later in the meeting. I could speak to it. I think there's information that might come out during the discussion and potentially having administration speak to this particular document that might bring some clarity into how it does or doesn't affect the other land use planning documents. And that would definitely influence how I would potentially vote on this. At this point, I'm not sure I would support it, but I may later after some discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Stachek. You have a motion to table this later in the meeting. Councillor Nelson.
Oh, I'll be voting in favor of tabling it, but keeping in mind that if we start getting into a lot of these other documents that haven't been in front of us, I'm just hoping we don't go too far off track. But I'll totally support tabling it, and seeing where the conversation goes. I just don't want it to get lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a motion to table. Seeing no one, I'll call to question that the above motion be tabled till later in the meeting. All those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Thank you. Councilor Reese.
Thank you, sir. So administration, in my reading, it says there are inconsistent decision-making as far as how we deal with land right now. So I'm thinking that this framework would assist us in making better decisions. Can you give me some examples on inconsistent decisions that have caused a dilemma?
So, the example, I mean, there have been times when the town has, say, sold land to prospective developers when, let's say, I'll take the environmental part as an example. So the town developed the environmental part, sold the land, and at the end of the day, what was the decision-making process that went into that, right? So if you think about it, so what was the economic, like when you go through all those guiding principles, was it the best opportunity for the town? Why did we do it? How does that balance out with our desire for economic growth, to be able to facilitate our economic growth and so forth? And so you kind of look at these things and you kind of say, you know, sometimes there is inconsistent decision making, and that will always happen when you don't have some kind of a guide or a frame on which to base decisions on. So the intent of the framework is really to help both council and administration to kind of go through, you know, the thought process of here's all the things that we need to think about before we decide, before we say yes to something. And that way we have had, you know, good debate on it, good decision making on it, and at the end of the day, we can truly justify why we did it from a holistic perspective, from a community-wide perspective.
Quick follow-up, please. So in turn, when we're buying land, our due diligence is even more.
Yeah, the same applies. It doesn't matter if you're acquiring a piece of land, if you're disposing of a piece of land, or if you're just dealing with a piece of land, right? Because one of the other things that's part of this too is that land goes through a life cycle similar to people, right? Sorry. We will have a piece of land that, let's say, is for a particular kind of facility or a particular kind of park. So maybe a spray park, right? So at one certain time of a life cycle, it's desirable to have a spray park as part of it. Times change, and you may decide that you want to intensify the use of that park. So you may want to put a clubhouse into that park, you may want to put a recreation facility into that park. And so part of this evaluation process really kind of helps you think through that process as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Reese. Council. I guess I have one question for Mr. Vanna. Would this be the type of document, and I do want to preface this, but there's a lot of info in this, and I can see the value in having something that bridges everything that encompasses planning and development. I get it. But would this be the document where we would have specifications on where council is the decision maker on a land purchase from a private industry? And I mean, okay, let me rephrase that. If administration chooses to support the sale of public lands to a developer or whomever, if administration deems it accordingly, then it would come to council to decide. My question or my issue is where would we have it, and maybe it's this document, where if a land developer wanted to purchase something and administration did not see it as fit, what's the process for that to come to council within this? Because in my experience, that's usually where it becomes murky. You have an idea, doesn't fit conceptually with other plans, and it's sometimes an interpretation from administration, and rightfully so, it's defended. But where would a mechanism be in place where all of these attempts for purchase would come to council to be judge, jury, and executioner overall, if it's within our powers to prove that?
So this, like I say, this sets up the framework for it. So if you agree with the framework, then the next step is to get the policy in place. And really, the policy and the directive becomes the how-to. This is the what. Then you need to decide how. How are you going to do that? And so what we do with all our things in the town is we have policies and directives that specifically outline what everybody's roles and responsibilities are.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Councillor Nelson.
I guess I'm going to throw out a hypothetical to kind of help why I'm struggling with this a little bit. So if we were a council that was completely focused on land acquisition, parks acquisition, and really trying to increase the green space in our community, and the subsequent council came in and they wanted to dispose of every piece of land and use it for revenue generation, what would change within the framework?
The essence of the process you would go through would be the same. How you weight things in the process will determine it. So for example, if you are you have a council that is very entrepreneurial. I work for councils that are very entrepreneurial and therefore acquire land in order to have economic growth in their community. So they actively pursue these things in order to do that. I've also worked for councils where they go through this kind of a process, but their objective is to protect all the environmentally sensitive features in the community. So how they view it, so it's through, you still have to go through and look at all the boxes, and in terms of something, in terms of is it well balanced, you end up with a struggle to say what is balancing out. Is it economic need versus social capital in your community versus environmental protection, right? So you need to go through it. So you want to think of it like a process or an evaluation process that you would go through, a thought process. Then that's what you go through, and this is not the reason we followed the asset management model is for two reasons. One, we already have it in place. Council has already endorsed it. The guiding principles, how we deal with all our assets, right? So we showed you that slide with all of the different assets that we have. We use those same guiding principles when we strategically think about how are we going to maintain our assets, how are we going to improve our assets, where do we expand our assets, when do we replace our assets, right? Very similar. This is a very similar thing, right? As a matter of fact, it's exactly the same thing. It's part of it. It's in fact part of it. And so that's why I say that.
That's a very specific follow-up. So then my question is, a council then, so if we wanted to be the entrepreneurial council and we want to set a policy to dispose of land to create economic development and revenue generation for the town, that policy falls under this framework instead of above this framework. So that's where I'm like, we're setting a framework without, and then the policies come after. To me, the policies, and again, this is just where I'm struggling with what the role of this framework and this document serves. And I guess that's why I'm struggling. If I knew that we were going to be coming back with kind of its purpose in relation to the bigger picture, I'd probably ask fewer questions, but that's where do we set that policy as a council or the next council?
Right, so if we could look at the slide presentation in just a second. And it's the third slide in. remember I discussed line of sight and sort of how it fits into the hierarchy that we've had. So typically you've got things like the next, in the blue square, you've got sustainability plan and the MDP and our area structure plans, which sort of outline land use and overall how we deal with things. Underneath that, you've got asset management program. This framework is technically part of the asset management framework program that we have, because what we're talking about is an asset of the town. Land is an asset. What this is doing, what the framework is doing, is utilizing the same guidelines that we have for all other assets, but being more specific, being that next lens, if you want to call it, down that you would use to evaluate how we deal with the land asset, right? That's the fundamental part of this, right? Fundamental part is that we have an asset, not unlike water lines, not unlike sewer lines, not unlike roads and parks and that type of thing. The thing about it is, the interesting part about, if you think about this, is that you have all these other assets, you've got all town assets, and they sit on top of this asset, right? You can't do anything else without thinking about the land, right? And so really, it's meant to act as a lens within the asset management framework.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Haas.
So what are we looking at, administration, C. Olson to Mr. Vanna, for the policies? Like, what are we looking at if this framework is adopted? Like a policy, like where are we at with that?
So we do have one policy that's in place today, and that one needs to be revisited and brought back to council. But we also need to develop these other ones. For example, how do we deal with MR lands? How do we acquire MR lands? How much do we acquire? When do we acquire? That type of thing. So there are these other types of ones that we need to put into place.
Okay. So all those, if I may, sorry, but those different like free, simple, or whatever, all those, we don't have policies for each one of those. So we're looking at a policy for each one of those land categories.
We're looking to develop. If you look at the so we're really looking at, if you look at how we the overall framework. If you look at, it's really how we use land, how we acquire land, how we dispose of land, right? That would be the essence of where we bring back policies.
Okay, so if I may, so remember Michael's question about the policy. So what I'm hearing is the policy. So if somebody were to wanted to, because I'm looking at this trigger for change, external request. They want to buy land from us, so they want to acquisition some land with us. So then that would trigger, by the looks of it, a land review by administration, and then the guiding principles. Where would the policy fit into that?
Well, the policy's
down there.
The policy's down
with the decision.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm hearing then is it would come then for decision no matter what. If somebody were to come and want to acquisition land, that would directly then trigger administration to go through the land review, go through all this, bring it to council, and then council's decision based on, and administration might in the land review recommend it's not a good idea to sell this land, right? But then we look at all the other things, in regards to, and then go through the policy decision, like is that?
Yeah, it may be okay to sell the land. It would be subject to certain things happening if we wanted to sell the land, or we wouldn't sell the land at all, right? So it looks through different scenarios, it filters through different decision-making, and really that's what we bring to council as part of that, right? The thing about it is, we sort of, administration needs council's acceptance of this framework and how it flows in order for us to feel comfortable to bring back some policies, right? That's the real essence of it. Because similar, if you think about the asset management, I'll give you, the asset management is a perfect, is the essence of this, right? We went through policy, right? Out of the policy, we developed a strategy, right? This is the strategy piece, right? You saw the strategy piece, right? It included council's guiding principles, right? Which is part of this, is the same ones, right? So it's part of that, and out of that, we bring to you decisions on how we manage our assets. So during the budget process, we do that. If we're building new assets, we bring that to council in terms of awarding a contract to build something, et cetera, right? So if we need land for a road right away to put an asset in, then guess what? We'll bring that to council because we need council's approval for that. So council's always involved in this.
So if I may, just one more question, then I'll leave it alone. So right now, if somebody were to want to acquisition lands, what happens without this framework?
Well, we use our process,
Right.
Planning and development process, to go through that. It incorporates much of this.
Mm-hmm.
But really, this is taking it to the council level to get buy-in from not only from a planning and development perspective, but from an asset management perspective, right? I think the important part is that we have process down here.
Mm-hmm.
What we don't have is council's buy-in from an asset management perspective on how we deal with land.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Oz. I'm trying to approach this in the most productive, from the most productive position, but I do echo a lot of Councillor Nelson's concerns, sort of the genesis of what instigates the policies in this framework. So one of two things, I would assume at least one of two things that would happen is we put a lot of work into this framework if we don't do policies. And for example, for me, page 32, it says, as a finite resource, a low-cost asset to maintain and appreciates with time. As a general policy, the town will not sell land without significant justification. But yet we got together 4 weeks ago and said infill was a priority for council. These are things to sort of flesh out. So in my mind, I'm like, do we create a few policies that touch upon major things, come back to this, and maybe change it a little bit, but there's some conflicting parts. So that's, I guess, the will of council, and I appreciate the work that's been done. We have to decide, do we really put some time and effort in going through these 40 pages and tweaking it perfectly, or do we postpone it and look at some policies in order to represent what the will of council is, and then come back to this? That's my dilemma, and I struggle with that. Mr. Dana?
Actually, what you said is not inconsistent, right? Because if we're not going to sell land unless it is strategically important to the town to do that, right? So it's not like we haven't done that, if you think about it. So if our objective is to have infill development, and what we need to do, we would end up selling some of the land that we have to do that. We would identify where, identify how, and when, and what type of housing or what type of industry or what type of whatever we want on that land, right? This would define how we would think about going through, what's the lens, what's the filters that we would look at in order to do that. It's not inconsistent with what you said. It's it in fact supports it.
I have another question. There was no one in the queue to my knowledge. My other question is, who generally buys Crown land? And do we know the history of it, of the town of Hinton, of buying Crown land?
I mean, I can't tell you in Hinton, and I can tell you in Wood Buffalo. You know, in that particular case, you can, a private landowner, and in my discussions with the province, a private developer can go and make a requisition to purchase and take land out of Crown land, a designation, and for private purposes. But there's a long process to that, and they go through a similar kind of an exercise where they would look at it and at the end of the day decide whether or not they want to dispose of it or not, right? In Hinton's example, I mean, we only have one real example on top of Rock Road where there is an industrial lease there, and that was done as a lease as opposed to a disposition or like an actual acquisition, because it was faster to do it that way. Typically what happens in Wood Buffalo is that it's the municipality on behalf of, I would say, a group of developers that buys an area from the Crown, does all of the pre-planning, does all of the, understand how you're going to service the lands and so forth, acquires that land, and then once they have acquired it, then they dispose of it to developers that are interested in it, right? That's actually a faster way to do it.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Emily, I apologize for not going through you too. So when you say strategically important to the town, is that what the discussion is? Strategically, if we sell this land, that's money to the town. If we sell the land and they build, that's tax dollars to the town. A company comes in and we're allowing growth. Is that what you mean by strategically important to the town?
Well, for example, the land, McMillan Lands, was a strategic purchase by the town. You acquired that land for a certain purpose, and there's a report coming the next council meeting that will highlight that particular parcel of land. But nonetheless, you acquired that land strategically for a strategic purpose. How you actually execute it is a whole other story, right? But strategically, that's why you acquired it. So you actually it's in your strategic plan that you want affordable housing and you want to develop housing in the community. Then, you actually executed it by purchasing a parcel of land or parcels of land. Now you get to the next levels to say, well, then how are you going to do it? And that's also a strategic move because you've got a number of different options as to how you can do it. But you want to make sure that at the end of the day, the taxpayer ensures that you've done what you strategically said you were going to do.
So when we sell, we're thinking the same way. We're strategically, we've thought this out, why we can sell this property.
Well, usually, I mean, it should be strategic in terms of what there's a reason you acquired it in the first place. There would be a reason why you want to dispose of it. And if you're going to dispose of it from a taxpayer's perspective, you want to make sure that the taxpayer is being protected in terms of dollars, like taxpayer dollars, in terms of how you're dealing with that.
I have one question and then I'm done. Encroachment agreements that exist today, if we went with this new framework, would they be grandfathered in?
It doesn't. This would support what we do today.
Okay.
It doesn't change what we do today. It
Okay.
in fact supports what we do today.
Okay, good, thank you.
Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michael. So just a little background. This item was intended to come to a standing committee meeting next week for discussion. Because of the amount of material there is to review and the time that it may take to get through this with council and ensure that all of your questions are answered, we added it to the special meeting agenda to give some additional time for discussion and review. And as well attempted to get this out as early as possible, knowing that it's quite a large document that takes some time to read and to think about prior to the conversation tonight. I just wanted to identify that and to suggest as well if, depending on council's comfort level, there is a second motion that refers this framework to, it says the next standing committee meeting for further discussion, that it likely wouldn't come to the next one, but it could come to a future. Just wanted to make sure that council was aware of the options, that there's no urgency necessarily in moving forward through the direction tonight, unless council is comfortable in doing so, in which case the policy development and some of that work can be initiated, as well as a reflection of the strategic plan reserve in the 2021 budget prior to budget deliberations.
Council? I guess I have one question. I try to use this question every once in a while to take it from the reverse angle, is what are the consequences, or what can we not do if we don't approve this?
We would continue to do what we're doing today. So we would have a departmental process in place, but would we be thinking about why we do what we do? Like from a council perspective, from an organizational perspective, would we be thinking, why are we doing this relative to it from an asset management perspective or a strategic perspective? And the answer is maybe not, right? So we may not be getting the greatest value for our taxpayers.
Councilor Haas.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I mean, when I read this, and I appreciate that question, because I mean, I think of the challenges that we're in, that were identified, and then what the framework would, how they would overcome those challenges. It seems like, and I guess this is where I'm kind of coming from, and we haven't had a lot of land stuff come to us, but when we do, we seem to be somewhat, I don't want to use it too loosely, but kind of shooting from the hip without a lot of thought process into it, where I saw this as a more detailed look at the request, whether it's buy and sell, whether it's rezone it, whatever it is, and it's taking it and reviewing it strategically and then looking at through the decision making, which eliminated a lot of that, especially too with looking into the future. That all of a sudden, if you don't think to, all of a sudden we got all our land gone and we got nothing left to do anything with. So I guess how I looked at it personally is as a lens that we can look at to make the best decision as possible with our lands, selling, buying, or whatever. So, I mean, I like the framework. I think there's still some questions on what comes next and what comes first. But I mean, I like that type of lens, because it is very similar to asset management, as Mr. Vander was saying, that we can look at all the assets and then make good decisions on whether or not, sure, we can postpone something, but what are the risks to postponing it and all that kind of stuff. So that's how I saw this document personally, and felt pretty comfortable with it so far. But where it fits into all things, I think that's where we still need to iron that out. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Haas. Councilor Nelson.
I'd like to move the council direct administration to establish a strategic land reserve in the 2021 budget for the purposes of future land needs and management. I think this is one thing we can get, that I'm comfortable getting off of our desks, and probably the only thing I'm comfortable is we can make a decision whether we contribute to this or not, but having a land reserve, I think only makes a lot of sense, especially if we at some point intend to dispose of land or really do anything around land. And going through the list of reserves we do have, there really isn't anything that covers this off. So this is a no risk motion that could provide us opportunities in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. And when do you think it's a different motion?
That's the second recommended action.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, that's where it is. Like, where did you put that?
Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Stashik.
Yeah, in the document, when it talks about the strategic land reserve, it talks about annual contribution. So is that something that administration would be looking to try and get moving forward in the 2021 budget? I ask because it will affect how I will vote on this budget.
For 2021, we haven't identified any contributions, any new contributions to it. We do have some I have to look at that more closely, but no, we don't have any specific contribution for 2021. Maybe moving a matter of dollars over from another reserve into that and calling it a strategic land reserve.
As a follow-up, is it feasible to have a strategic land reserve that exists without annual contributions, and it's simply as a flow-through reserve to take disposition dollars in and then expenditure dollars out?
Yeah, so I'll give you a good example of that. So every year we license some of our land. That may be an opportunity in which to help to fund that particular reserve. Because right now we do incur some costs just on a day-to-day basis for whether it's surveying costs, whether it's land title costs, whether it's whatever. And so, having a reserve in place helps us to do that, and being able to target some of those dollars that we already receive as part of the revenue into a reserve, that also helps too.
So now that I've got a response, can I speak to it? Thank you. So I'm speaking in favor of the motion, but I do want to voice a reservation that I have concerns about having an annual contribution established now or at any point in the future. I think our budget moving forward is going to be challenging enough without having a new reserve that's going to have contribution tacked onto it. So I'm in favor of establishing the reserve, but in terms of an initial contribution or ongoing contribution, that I would be against. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Nelson.
I fully agree with everything Councillor Stashik said. There's been talk of disposing of other pieces of land and having that go towards a dedicated reserve that is land, and ultimately the council motion we could move into something else if we saw fit. But having one less barrier to create that flow through and make it a little bit easier to dispose of land coming into really challenging budget times, to me is just a good strategy for us. But yeah, I can't see us having a lot of wiggle room to start putting significant money into an annual land reserve. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. So maybe I read it, maybe I didn't, but is this document saying that a portion of the land sale monies will go into this strategic land reserve?
I would argue that that's a good place where you have a policy that actually talks about that. That would be a policy. You'd have to develop a policy in terms of that direction.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate? Seeing none, we'll call the question. The council direct administration to establish a strategic land reserve in the 2021 budget for the purposes of future land needs and management. Council, all those in favor? It's passed unanimously. Council, do we want to lift the tabled motion? There's an opportunity for that. Also, Councillor Nelson.
I'll move to lift the tabled motion from the table.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, any debate?
Because if I could speak, I'll speak to it again. I have struggled more with this agenda item than I have with almost any in the 3 years, and understanding how it fits. Sometimes I feel like we create a solution that is awaiting a problem, and I kind of feel that it is this way. I think we're able to do just as much as we're doing now, if not more, with a little bit more flexibility than if we adopted this at this time without really a full understanding of the implications it might have, and where our policies and goals and our updated strategic plan that is coming back to council, where that fits in. So I look forward to seeing it as part of the bigger scope, especially when it comes to planning and development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. So just for clarity, this is just a motion to bring it back to the floor, just in case. Council, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Here we have a motion on the floor. Thank you, Wendy.
I believe I've spoken to it.
Councilor Reyes.
Thank you, sir. So my concern is if we go this route, then we're delaying the conversation we're having tonight. And I want to keep this conversation going. So this is, 3 months, end of January. I want to keep this conversation going now, so I won't be supporting this.
Thank you, Councilor Reyes. Councilor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I kind of have an ongoing theme where I try to make sure that administrative time is spent on the highest priority, most productive things that they can be. And in light of that, I'd just like to ask administration for some clarity, maybe some high-level feedback regarding what is potentially going to be involved in the report that's being asked for in this motion. The reason I ask, my understanding of the land management framework doesn't seem to be particularly conflicting with the other land management documents that we need, the land use bylaw and the municipal development plan, and that it only governs land that's owned and controlled by the town, whereas the rest of it covers different aspects of development in town. But I'd like administration's input on that because it would help me decide what the best use of time is moving forward.
Your worship, I'd be happy to commit to bring it back at the same time when we have the other discussion on the land framework, to just so that we're not out of context. And the level of detail is, I always say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So it's going to be largely pictorial to try and to show how the land framework fits into the hierarchy of everything else that we do.
If I could follow up, sorry, what would be the timeline for that then?
Thank you, Worship. We would be looking into November for a standing committee meeting to bring this back, potentially November 17th, I think is.
If I could follow up then, that I would much rather see that come then as part of the holistic discussion around this, rather than a separate report that could be end of January before it comes. And for that reason, with the assurance from administration that it'll come back when this is back on the table for discussion, I won't be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Stashik. Councilor Nelson.
Yeah, I think understand the motion was made no later. Administration could bring it back next week if they wanted to. And with it being high level, it's just ensuring the next time we talk about it, it will be captured as part of that discussion. So I'm happy with how it is right now, making sure that we do understand the context of how it relates to the other documents at a very high level. And as Director Vanna said, it would be largely pictorial. So it doesn't sound like a significant use or drain on administration's time. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council? All right, I'll call to question that administration bring a high-level report regarding land management framework and its relationship to the planning and development hierarchy to a standing committee meeting no later than January 31st, 2021. Council, all those in favor? Opposed? Defeated. Council? Councilor Hawes.
I'd like to move that council refer this land management framework to the soonest standing committee meeting for further discussion. Do we need a motion to do that we bring this back to another standing committee to have that conversation? That's how I understood it.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Michaels. So that is the second option for council. I did mention that it wouldn't be coming to the next standing committee meeting, but you could include a standing committee meeting in November.
Yeah.
Date attached.
So that's where I was looking at, yeah, because what I'm hearing, if I may, from Mr. Vanna, that I think he's already prepared to answer some of those high-level questions in that next conversation. So I'd like to see that this come back to have that conversation, to continue the conversation rolling. So if we can put the date of November, what did you say, 17th? Yeah, November 17th, standing committee meeting for further discussion. I think it gives a little bit more time for us to kind of, think things through a little bit, read through it again, and then get that overarching look at things and how it fits, and potentially then where it goes from there in regards to policies and bylaws and things. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Nelson.
I'm actually going to speak against this. I struggle to understand what problem this is solving right now, and building off of Councillor Stashik, making sure that it's the best use of administrative time. I think there's a lot of things we've got going on, a lot of irons in the fire, budget process right now, and again, I feel like this is a solution awaiting a problem, and we don't have that problem right now, and I would rather focus on budget, and if we're having this discussion, have it after we've got our strategic planning documents done and look at it in a bigger context. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Hawes.
And I guess I see it the other way. I see that there are a lot of problems when I look at this thing and the challenges that administration have. We've heard also a number of challenges potentially from, outside sources as well. So I do see this as land is an important part of our community. It's an asset that we aren't, I think, spending enough time on to manage it and properly and to look at it strategically. And I think that that's a big part of our community, whether it grows, whether it whatever, and I think that it is a problem right now from what I've read from this framework and why this framework is in. So I think that, if it's a little bit later into after the budgets, I'm totally fine with that, but I think we definitely need to have some sort of framework in place, because currently now we don't have very little from what I hear. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. I'll be speaking against this, the same concept why I voted against the other one prior. I just don't think any of this is a huge priority now, until at least I better understand it now. Could we spend an hour or two at a standing committee? Sure, but in the middle of a budget cycle with something that's so complex, I cannot, and that's a compliment to administration. And planning and development understand this stuff generally better than councilors do. We're going to do this in the middle of budget season. I couldn't get through these 40 pages and understand everything. Like, I really struggled with this. And to talk about this in a month and potentially give direction, I think we're better suited to do this after the budget has been approved for 2021, and give this, I think, the right amount of attention, because I do believe it's going to take multiple meetings, workshops, or something if we want to go away from the policy approach and to really approve this document. And I say that with, in hindsight, even the LUB and the MVP, there are a lot of things in those documents that in theory were right, in practice did not translate perfectly, and we've been fixing those along the way. It's because we didn't give, I feel, the proper attention it needed, because we are told in so many different ways. So not that I don't think there's a place for this, I think there is a place for this. I just think doing it November 17th is a terrible decision. And that's all for me. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is one of the things that I've been kind of asking myself as I read through the document too. I'm trying to think back to occasions where there may have been situations where something like this would have helped to address it, and I couldn't think of very many. Moving forward, there's definitely, there's some potential. There's always potential that things could come to light that this would help address, but it just made me think, like, and I've been struggling through this whole discussion trying to think of a way that I could, respectfully ask administration where this falls on a prioritized list. Is this a really absolutely necessary need? Is this a want? Is this something that would be good to have to help guide administration? because I'm in the same boat as some of the other councillors who have spoke about whether this is something that warrants investing a bunch of administrative and council time in right now, or if this is something that could be accepted for information and perhaps revisited down the road at some point. So I'm torn right now, and I'd ask administration if they can respond to that, how important this thing is.
Administration?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I think to answer that question, there's kind of an opportunity with the resources and capacity that we have right now for administration to take a look at this and to bring it forward. In other communities, as I understand it, this is to create the framework first as a best practice, and Mr. Mannikin can chime in. This is a conversation we've had today. Other communities move into the policy development phase without a framework. I believe that they have other things in place to make that a good practice to move ahead with, such as a really robust asset management system that's fully utilized. So a few considerations like that. This was really intended to give council an idea of the big picture of land decision-making within the town of Hinton. There are current inquiries right now that we're managing based on an informal practice that's not related to any policy that council's approved. So administration is fielding those inquiries based on what has been described, a process that is more informal than something that council understands, that the public understands when they come forward with requests to purchase property or town-owned property. That process and their role in it and what they need to provide isn't well understood. So this was to clean that up, particularly looking at council's previous strategic plan and some of the discussions lately around growth and development and what can help that. This is a major undertaking, and it's something that's important that council understands and has an opportunity to ask all the questions and kind of walk around the framework and make sure that we understand how it works, and administration as well, for that matter, to understand that. So it was really an opportunity to bring this forward. The work that Mr. Manny and his team have undertaken on this, the framework is done. It's looking ahead to the policy development. Should council support the framework, that would be the next pieces of work that administration would undertake, and those would take much longer to bring forward to council. If that answers your question.
Now that I have that clarity, can I speak to it? So, in that case, thank you. I appreciate the clarity from administration, and I will be supporting the proposed motion. I don't think that there's any harm in continuing a discussion in a month or so. There's no obligation to council to make any commitment to move forward at that point, and there can always be a consideration to move decision down the road or something after that discussion. So I am in favor of having a continued discussion on November 17th. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Race?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For me, when I hear inconsistent decision-making regarding land, and to me that is buying it and that is selling it. Then when I hear that we, council, we have final say. And when I have final say, I want to know what I'm talking about. So, and I also know I have a month from now till November 17th to ask a whole bunch of questions, to come into that meeting prepared. And every question I ask, you also will get that answer. So I will definitely support this.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Nelson?
I have a procedural question / challenge with this motion. Is that the motion to refer this agenda item goes as is onto that agenda, correct? So, some of the concerns that may have been addressed tonight, and people voted against the previous tabled motion because it could come back in a month, but referring this agenda item to a future meeting doesn't, I believe, allow administration to add onto it. It just carries forward this conversation, if I understand the definition of refer correctly.
Administration?
Thank you very much. That is correct. That would refer this report as it is tonight to that November 17th meeting. So an addition of that context for within the planning hierarchy is needed. An amendment would be needed to this motion.
Yeah, at this point, I don't really know how to amend a referred motion, so that's gonna be one more reason that I won't support it. And if something came forward after and there was that opportunity, I might be able to think of something then, but thank you for your consideration.
Mr. Vanna?
Your worship, I was gonna say that what this does is take this report, pushes it over to the 17th, but as we committed, I mean, we're gonna provide you with supplemental information in addition to this report that will help to clarify some of the questions that were asked in terms of the hierarchy and that.
Thank you, Mr. Vanna. Councilor Stashik?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to put council's mind at ease, I'd like to propose an amendment to the motion to, sorry, when you're ready, Wendy. That council direct administration to provide supplemental information to the land management framework discussion on the November 17th, 2020 standing committee meeting. It needs a little more than that, I think. In response to discussion from the October 20th, 2020. I think that's clear, and I'm open to some wordsmithing if somebody wants to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Stashik. I'll speak in favor of this. I may still not vote in favor of the entire motion, but at least I prefer this, that if we are going to discuss this on the 17th, I'd want that extra information. So I have no problem with that. I'm still caught on whether I want to discuss this at all on the 17th, but I appreciate at least better information coming forward. Councilor Nelson.
Procedurally, is this not too similar than the motion that was previously defeated? We defeated the motion to bring back the things that were
But it had a different time.
I'm going to go to administration for clarity on that question.
Thank you, Mayor Michael. So if it's in addition to, Wendy, referring the land management framework, so it's bringing that information back in context of the report that was seen tonight.
Yeah, if I might add, I don't know if this helps administration with perhaps they have more clarity, but for me, even the date is enough to change the scope of a motion. To me, it would separate the previous motion that was defeated, which was in January of 31st. So to me, that doesn't preclude from rediscussing a motion with a different date, even though conceptually it's the same information. That's sort of how I understood it. Councilor Stashik.
Yeah, to me, there's a couple marked differences. The difference in the date and that it's coinciding with the next discussion that we're having regarding this. And it's not specific to any particular supplemental information. It's encompassing all the supplemental information that could address any of the discussion that happened tonight. So to me, it's a different motion. Thank you.
Councilor Stashik. Council, we have an amendment on the floor. Any further debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question that council direct administration to provide supplemental information to the land management framework discussion on the November 17, 2020 standing committee meeting in response to discussion from the October 2020 special meeting of council. All those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Now we have a joint motion together.
Second here. and paste.
Okay, council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate? Again,
I could take all of that out because it's all basically referred to above.
no. Sierra Olson, any input on that?
I would keep it.
Yeah, we'll just leave it
Okay.
the same. I do appreciate that if this motion does pass. I feel way better. We'll have a bit more information on the 17th. I will still speak against it. This is going to take, I think, at least 5-10 hours of my time, at least, maybe more, to really be prepared for that meeting. I just think it's too much for us during budget season on something that we still can't quantify how important it is, because as the CAO alluded to, that it will take quite some time after for policy to be driven from. So that to me sort of nailed it, convinced me that the imminent impact of a land management framework won't come for much later. So I'd rather still talk about this in the month of January or February in a perfect world. But that's all for me. Council, anything further? Seeing none. Call to question that council refer to the land management framework to the November 17, 2020 standing committee meeting for further discussion, and that council direct administration to provide supplemental information to the land management framework discussion on the November 17, 2020 standing committee meeting in response to discussion from the October 2020 special meeting of council. Council, all those in favor? And opposed? And that was passed 4-2. Myself and Councillor Nelson against.
Sorry.
Okay, council, good debate and discussion. Anything further for this action item? Seeing none, administration. And that will take care of our action items for this evening. Councillor Haas?
Motion to go in camera.
Councillor, administration, I'm trying to recall procedurally, motion to go in camera, is that debatable? Do you want to confirm?
It's 15.6.
Not debatable.
It is debatable. Okay, Councillor Nelson?
More of a clarifying question to administration. I won't support going over the 4 hours tonight. So I guess I'm just looking for some context as to the conceptual length of the in-camera discussion tonight and whether it makes any sense to start that conversation now or refer it to or postpone it to a future meeting. Thank you.
Administration.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. There would likely be more than 15 minutes worth of discussion needed on this item tonight. It is fairly time sensitive, but I'll leave that to council's discretion.
Thank you, CEO Olson. I won't be speaking in favor of going in camera. I'd like to just go recess for 5 minutes and then go in camera, or we can simply go in camera and discuss whether we want to go on this evening, because I'm of the same mindset as Councillor Nelson. This is a conversation that I think will take quite some time, and we have an opportunity to do so perhaps another day, but we can have a quick conversation about it, but that would be the will of council to end the meeting anyways there. So. Council, anything further? Do we, I guess my last point is, do we want to recess before going in camera? If there's no need for recess, I'll support going in camera. Councilor Race?
I would like a short recess.
Okay, so I'll be voting against going in camera, and I'll call a recess and we'll reconvene, would be my intent. Okay, council, all those in favor of going in camera? Opposed? Or Councilor Hawes?
I was for.
Opposed? That was defeated. I'll
So
make I'll give
5 to 4:42?
3. So we'll adjourn, we'll recess for 4 minutes.
I need to know who
Against was Law, Nelson, Michaels.
I'd like to reconvene this meeting at 7:53. Council. Would you like to do anything? Go in camera or adjourn? Conversation, Councilor Race.
I move to go in camera.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Councilor Nelson.
Are we going in camera for the purpose of discussing the actual agenda item and performing the agenda item? Or are we going in camera for the purpose of exclusively determining whether we are going to discuss that item tonight?
Council. Councilor Race.
My intent is we're going in camera to discuss the agenda item proposed for this in-camera session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Race and Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a motion to go in camera. All those in favor? Opposed? That was carried 5-1. And we are in camera. There we go. I'd like to reconvene this meeting out of camera at 8:02. Council, what would you like to do? Councilor Stashik.
I'd like to move to extend beyond 4 hours.
We have a motion to extend beyond 4 hours. Councilor Nelson.
If I could speak to it, understanding the agenda item is organizational discussion and understanding that it could have some significant impacts on our municipality moving forward. And looking at the recommendations of many reports we've had in the past that we should be having shorter meetings. I'm not comfortable that we're having a very impactful discussion after the end of subsequent other meetings. It's not really about the use of meeting fees and that part. It's more are we in a place to do good business right now and make good decisions on behalf of municipalities? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, any further debate? I'll call to question to extend the meeting. All those in favor? Opposed? That was not carried. Motion to adjourn. Councilor Nelson. Council, any debate? All those in favor? Can't debate it.